get started with this morning. We have before us a proposed agenda. This is the opportunity to remove anything off the consent agenda if there's a desire to do so. Not seeing any hands on that, so looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved, seconded, thank you. All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the consent agenda. Corporate issues, looking for a motion on that. Moved, thank you. Seconder, great. Call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. That takes us to section B, which is actually a closed session this morning. I've got to read this, that in accordance with section 91A and C of the Community Charter, the board closed the meeting to the public on the basis of personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality, or another position appointed by the municipality, labor relations, or other employee relations. So looking for a motion to go in camera. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. I'll give Adam a minute. And remember, Adam, to move Tracy into the main portion, please. Mr. Nielsen, I'll just turn it right over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the board for having me here today. I'm here to report on the findings and recommendations from the organizational efficiency review on which I've been working with the organization, in particular the CAO and the senior managers. My brief in starting this piece of work was to look at many different aspects of the administration of the organization and to come back with some ideas aimed at trying to address concerns that maybe are out there, some challenges that are out there, and all in the spirit of improving the effectiveness and the efficiency of the organization. The breadth of topics I was asked to look at was quite broad, and so my recommendations and findings cover a number of different points. Sometimes in these exercises, you focus in on one or two specific things. This was more of a global look at a number of things, and so the recommendations and the findings, the board will note, Mr. Chair, cover that broad range. So in no particular order, I'll just start going through the ones that I've brought forward to this meeting. The first is organization structure. Structure is something that has been addressed already. This was brought up with the CAO halfway through the review, so that was done in August. The board has looked at that and has endorsed that new structure. In essence, the structure significantly reduces the number of direct reports the CAO has. So in other words, the CAO's span of control. And that's very important because it allows the CAO then to make sure that he is positioned to be a very effective policy advisor to the board because he has the time to do it, and also a very effective direct manager of the senior management team, all of which report to him, and two of the senior managers who also report to him. So reducing that span of control was very important. Creating 4 large departments was also considered important. That's in place. There is one change left to make on that structure, and that relates to the volunteer fire chiefs. They are currently reporting through a spokesperson to the chief administrative officer. That's a necessary point to have in place right now. That may not be necessary in the future going forward, and so my recommendation is to revisit the placement of those fire chiefs at some point, and when the CAO and the fire chiefs are comfortable with making the move them under the Protective Services Division where they perhaps more naturally sit given the function that they provide. The second point is dealing with centralized functions, Mr. Chair, and when we talk about functions that are centralized in nature, we're talking about things such as finance, all the various components of finance. We're talking about procurement. We're talking about information systems, communications, legislative services, human resources, intergovernmental relations, records management, those kinds of things. Everything that makes up what I like to call the corporate infrastructure of the organization. Organizations that have strong centralized services that are recognized as as the authority over their areas and are recognized by other departments as places and as departments through which they have to move in order to act and with which they have to comply. That is the requirements coming out of the centralized services. Organizations that have those characteristics, those qualities in place are, by their very nature, more efficient than organizations that do not. Centralized services are important in terms of risk management. They're important in terms of brand. They're important in terms of consistency and efficiency in moving things through. In the past, there have been instances, and this is something that is not unique to Regional District Okanagan-Similkameen, I can tell you, but there have been instances here where we've had individual departments, in essence, doing their own thing because they were able to do their own thing. And that means that exposes the organization to risk. It's just confusing for staff and it's not terribly efficient. So moving those through centralized services, we're seeing that much more consistently now, but continuing to bolster that's very important. What I've suggested in terms of recommendations is to bolster that shift with stronger policy statements, getting some of those in place to require buy-in to centralized services. This is a very command and control type of thing. Some areas of management, by the way, I can just state, are ones that we like to get lots of buy-in to. When we're dealing with centralized services, it's very much, thou shalt do this. There's no two ways about it. Like, you either abide by what legislative services says and how we approach the board, or you abide by HR, you abide by procurement, or you don't. And there's no kind of negotiation around it. And we want to make sure that everybody abides by it. Purchasing, by the way, is you've got a strong purchasing policy in place now, and you've got a strong purchasing function in place. So that's been one area that in RDOS and in other jurisdictions we see in the past as having been a little bit problematic with with different departments doing their own thing. That's now stopped, and that's a very good thing. Communications, really important to continue, in my view, the movement towards centralizing the communications. I know that doesn't sit well with some groups that typically have done their own communications in the past, but it's important in terms of brand, in which the RDOS has invested a lot of resources and capital. So I think continue to move that towards centralized organizations for the organization. There are implications for branding, consistency, quality standards, efficiency, effectiveness, using the expertise we have in place. We've got a good department in place right now. It's fairly well-resourced. It can always be more well-resourced, especially if we bring in more of an intergovernmental relations function, which there is the capacity there in terms of abilities to manage. We will at some point, I think, or you will as a board, I think, want to consider additions to staffing at some point. I'm not sure it has to be in 2025. I've suggested in the recommendations to focus on that, looking at 2026. The only caveat there is if the board feels it wants to move faster on intergovernmental relations and really build that up, you may want to consider a move sooner rather than later in terms of providing some extra capacity there. Governance is something that is not typically in an administration review. However, it was within the purview, or at least wasn't outside of the purview that I was given. So I took advantage of that silence and jumped into it because I think it has really important implications for the efficiency of the organization and the effectiveness of the organization. The current system of our governance model for the board, it relies on large committees of the whole, 5 of them, to do the work of the board, to sit as committees. That's unique, and it's, in my view, not terribly efficient or effective as a way to do deep study and discussions on key issues that are important for the board to take action on, for the board to consider. My thinking, my suggestion to the board is to start to look at a different system of creating committees that are focused on topics as opposed to being aligned with departments, that are smaller in number of people, that really make use of strong terms of reference in place of the terms of reference that are in place right now, that terms of reference that describe the function and the purpose of the committee, the membership of the committee, what the committee is going to be looking at, a scope of study, and how the committee is going to report to the board. There is, if there are smaller committees as well, we need to keep in mind that we've got legislative services needs to be involved in that, so we get some consistency on how those are managed. We also have the idea of the Electoral Area Services Committee, which I know has been talked about by the board. I know it's something that's being considered by the board, and I would add my view to that in very much in favor of some kind of electoral area or local area services committee, because I think that there is a need, particularly with 9 electoral areas, to have a separate forum in which electoral areas, which rely on the regional district as their local government, which is unlike the municipalities, a forum for those electoral areas to come together to start to create joint priorities and to deal with issues that frankly the rest of the board doesn't need to be dealing with.
There's a question over here, if I could. Director Gilbert?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Yeah, I just have a question in regards to, what you see when you look at these committee holes, because the one thing, a lot of the time that I feel what we get is just basically staff reports or decisions that could be made at the board meeting, that we don't actually within these committees delve into those topics of, environmental, is this, the staff come with a report. And to me, I've seen it basically just defers the problem or defers the decision over meetings. So, have you seen throughout your assessment of that governance any these committees doing that, not the in-depth, but should a lot of the stuff that comes to these committees just goes directly to a regular board meeting for decisions of what do you call it, to the directors?
Yes. Thank you through the chair to Director Gilbert. I think that some of the materials coming to the board, to come to the committees are okay. I think that the difficulty is that when you have a committee of 20 people, it's very difficult to have good discussions on particular issues. In the same way, it's difficult for a board this size to have really focused discussions on different areas of policy in different areas and different topics. That's why large boards have committees to do the work of the board and to come back with recommendations. The committees are smaller though. I worked as a general manager in Metro Vancouver with the largest regional district. We had a board of 41 directors. They created committees with a maximum of 9 or 10 people on those committees. There were 14 of the committees, and they were all subject related. Those committees, I can tell you because I managed 5 of them, those committees did deep analysis, deep study on key things and brought recommendations back to the board. Those recommendations were always subject to questioning by the board, always subject to being sent back for further work, but it was an efficient way to bring policy ideas to the board, to make decisions through recommendations and ultimately by the board over services. And to have forums for different groups of directors to come together to discuss topics that were important to those jurisdictions. So it's some of the materials that go to the committees now, yes, they're kind of for the regional district as a whole. It's you might as well send those to the board, but I think there's other ones that you could focus on at those committees. And there's always going to be lots of issues that are referred to the board for further study by the board, for further study to a committee. But I think in particular, the one that is going to be really helpful, I believe, is the electoral areas one. It's unique in a regional district with 9 electoral areas not to have a separate forum for those areas to be able to talk about issues that are germane to local areas, to unincorporated areas. I think also the committees, that other committees could align more with the priorities that the board is setting through a strategic priorities, through their strategic planning process to deal with some of the issues and opportunities under those different topic areas.
Follow up, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. And I appreciate that because I've been the alternate mainly, and when I've come here, I don't understand the committee structure of why do we have committees when all the board is here? For that's to me, it's just a board meeting at that stage. Question in regards to the electoral area subcommittee. I think we kind of had this discussion maybe previously, but I want to know your take on allowing for legislation to go through that committee as well. So one thing, for efficiency, we have, development services coming up soon. A lot of that's all rural matters. And, I know some directors have differences in that, but I was kind of want to know your opinion on having that stuff go through so the municipal directors are not there, and it allows that forum for rural directors to make the decisions on land. And if something has to come back to corporate, that comes back to a regular meeting. So that way, the rural directors have that space to talk about the rural matters.
And thank you through the chair. I think it's very appropriate for the Electoral Area Services Committee, if there were one, to be looking at those types of matters. I think that we need to keep in mind that they don't make decisions. They make recommendations to the board. So if they're reviewing development applications, they're going to make a recommendation to the board. And the board then has the right to open that up for question.
Okay, follow up on that?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Well, I guess the reason why I'm saying that is because we don't, I don't have a vote on those matters, on land matters in rural areas.
Correct.
Then they come to the board. So can that committee just make those decisions at that committee? Because I'm not there to make that decision.
Yes, thank you for that. And the short answer is no, because there are certain things that can be delegated to committees or commissions. So you can delegate a fair degree of authority to a committee to do certain things. One thing you can't delegate is the power to make bylaws, and so or to change bylaws in this case, so anything that requires a rezoning bylaw, for example, that's an amendment to an existing bylaw. So that has to come to the board for ratification.
Okay, Director Monteith and then Barco.
Thank you through the chair. Maybe a suggestion to add on your suggestion would be that those ideas could come through development consent agenda. So it'd just be a way of speeding it up. Yeah.
And if I may, I think Director Monteith is onto a very good idea there. And I think that I would think, so a consent agenda for directors who may not be familiar with them, in essence, when we have committees that are reporting to a board, the committee will make a series of recommendations, and several of those recommendations will be very banal, almost just very straightforward. And those cases, and a lot of times the board will say, we don't need to spend a lot of time dealing with those, so let's put those on a consent agenda, and then we can consider all of the recommendations on that consent agenda at once, and we can vote to approve them. It's a very efficient way of passing through those items. Other recommendations, your senior management may say, we need to pull this one out and put it to the board because this one has implications for Penticton or for the municipalities. This one has implications from a policy perspective. This one could have risk implications for the broader regional district, and we need the board as a whole to spend a little bit of time talking about that.
Okay. Director Barkwell.
Thank you, Chair. I had sort of the same questions Director Gilbert had, is like, why are the municipal directors sitting through all these discussions where we have no vote? And so, well, then you don't have a quorum if we're not here. And you talked about the legislative things, but you also suggested then that could sort of be danced around with a little bit, as if all those decisions were just added as a consent agenda and approved by the committee or by the board as a whole. So that sounds like a solution to what Director Gilbert was saying.
Absolutely. And I think maybe just to comment on one point there with the respect to quorum, that's a little bit confusing because it's when we create a committee, when the board creates a committee, and actually more specifically, so, and just as an aside, if I may, and I'm going to come back to the question. I'll come back to the question as an aside. So we have two types of committees that can be created by a council or a board. The first type is a standing committee. A standing committee is a permanent committee, and there's one person who gets to create the standing committee, and that's the chair, or in the case of a municipality, the mayor. So the chair or the mayor determines which committees should be in place as standing committees. Those are permanent committees that meet on a scheduled basis, and they have a defined scope of review that they want to do. The second type of committee is called select committee. Select committees are designed to be more time limited. They are designed to focus on a specific topic, provide a report, and then typically dissolve. Some of them go on longer than that. Some of them select committees can go on for a long time, but they're not permanent in the sense. And another key difference is the chair in the regional district context doesn't create select committees. The board creates select committees. In practice, many chairs and many mayors will say, I am going to create these standing committees, but I'm going to do so with the consent of the board. So it's important to me to ensure that the board supports these committees. I'm going to propose these committees to this committee structure to the board and get their endorsement, even though at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to proverbially sign off, that is, or figuratively sign off on that. Back to the question then with respect to quorum, or the point on quorum. When a chair, with or without the board's consent, creates a standing committee, or when a board creates a select committee, you determine the number of members you want on that. That is your committee membership. Quorum then on the committee is whether you have half of those people who are assigned to the committee showing up at a committee meeting. So the notion that you have to have other municipal directors in committees on issues on which they have no vote to achieve quorum just doesn't make sense. I know that, I think that's there, and I'm not saying you don't make sense, Director. I'm saying that I think has been a point of confusion in some discussions.
Okay, a follow-up?
Yes, but if you had just the rural directors as your standing committee,
Yes.
and then they passed a resolution like the, D1 here, the next, it's a unweighted rural vote, simple majority. If they themselves, even if all of those rural directors were present, would it be a quorum? And that was the issue that was brought to me. So if their committee resolution was just in the agendas, then there's never an issue that particular resolution, such as say in D1 here, had a quorum when it was approved because it's approved by the board as a whole.
Well, I think the way we work with the committee would pass a resolution as a committee. It would deal with an issue. It would make a recommendation in the form of a resolution. So, that the board, it would be recommend that the board do A, B, C. It would make a recommendation to the board. In order to make that recommendation, the committee would have to itself have quorum. Otherwise, it couldn't have its meeting. It would then go to the board. The board then, if the board didn't have quorum, that would be a different issue. So at the board meeting, you need to make sure you can constitute a meeting of the board. So it's a little bit different, I think.
Director Coyne?
So a committee of the whole is technically a standing committee. It was created. We have quorum at it, but because we are a committee, we don't actually have the authority to make a final decision. It still has to go to the board. So even if we have an EA committee or a planning committee that has a quorum on it, if we select and say through the terms of our committee that we're going to have 10 people or 11 people on that, it's 50% of that number that makes the quorum of that committee. That committee still has to report back to the board, and the board still has to make the final decision. That's how you get around it. Otherwise, we'd never be able to have committees at municipalities or regional districts.
And I will just mention very briefly, if I may, just on Director Coyne's point, committee of the whole is actually typically a standing committee. Your terms of reference in your board policy manual very clearly state they're select committees.
Yeah.
So that's,
It's slightly different than the usual.
Yes.
That's for sure. A follower or another question? Go ahead, Director Barkwell.
I'm speaking of a potential rural directors only committee.
Yeah.
And it seems a bit of an anomaly that they can't make a decision such as what's on the agenda here today, even though they're the only ones that are allowed to vote. Because on the
Yes,
issue.
That's those bylaw changes that we can't make.
So
The board has to.
Thank you. Yes. So the board can delegate certain authorities to the committee. One authority it can't make is the ability to change or make a bylaw. So on those points, the committee still has to make a recommendation to the board. Then the board, as the legal body representing the corporation, makes that decision. Even if it's a stakeholder vote at the board, where not everybody votes in, they still have to be sitting on the board to do that. Yes.
It's an oddity. That's all there is to it. Continue.
Yes, I will.
A question online. Director Wiebe?
Yeah, I would just like to address that not all municipalities are unaffected by decisions. We have shared services kind of uniquely that other municipalities might not be affected in a similar way. But some of the dialogue today has been that municipalities are unaffected, which is untrue, as was shown when we did our recent Waste Connections contract. And there was some information we were provided with that we thought we were operating under one set of rules. We didn't find out until very, very late in the process that wasn't true. And so our residents are dealing with a particular situation that was dealt with at the board level that we thought we were operating at a local level, and that wasn't true. So some of these things, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. These things do affect our residents uniquely. I recognize that at this table, but I just really would like it not to get lost in this, that there are some matters that significantly impact our residents that might look like a rural area matter or an electoral area matter, but it, at least in one municipality, it makes a significant difference.
Yeah, and thank you I want to thank Director Wiebe for that comment. It's very appropriate and very accurate. And I think the key part that Director Wiebe, the key word that was said there is that there are certain things or some matters will have big implications for municipalities. Not all matters will. And when we look at a committee structure, we look at what we're going to put under different committees, we try to separate out those that are going to be more local in nature with fewer implications from those that, even though they're local, have implications for the regional federation. And as we go in real time in working with committees, and we find in a committee that we have got into an issue that without understanding it beforehand, has serious implications or potential implications for the federation or for a neighboring municipality. The prerogative of the chair, the urging of the senior manager who's providing management, and then, or if that's missed, even then when it gets to the board, is to say, let's pause. This is an issue that even though it falls under the purview of this committee, we need to have a broader discussion. And so I think there's that exercising of that judgment to say which issues maybe we need to have a bigger discussion on, recognizing that many issues we won't have to have that bigger discussion on.
Okay. Moving on.
Moving on, so, and I'll just mention then to wrap up the governance thing, and there's some recommendations in there, Mr. Chair, for the board to consider. Why is governance in here? Because governance, when we think about efficiency and effectiveness of the regional district, the structure of the governing body is very important in that context. And it also has implications for staff. And the more efficient and more effective we can think of a structure for the governing body, the easier it will be for staff and the more efficient they'll be able to be in providing the support that the board needs and its committees need. Moving on, organizational culture, Mr. Chair, very important part of any organization. Of course, we have happily had a big shift in organization culture towards the positive, and that's very important. And there's a number of things, a number of initiatives that have been taken. New interdepartmental charter is good. We've got interdepartmental committees in place to deal with staffing matters, bringing staff together from different places, all good stuff. The strategic plan being provided by the board, I think, will help culture as well, because it will clearly state what the board wants to see the organization do and help staff then come under that. So all of that, I believe, is going to continue to bolster a positive culture. The only recommendation there is really to continue on the path that the organization's on in that respect. Development services, staffing levels, I've suggested may need to be increased, and there is an adding a planner, one that's underway right now. And there's a plane behind me, I think. And there is given that we've got a department that is stretched quite thin right now and not fulfilling certain responsibilities to the degree it may wish to with respect to community planning, but also development planning. Looking at that resourcing is going to be important. Talked a little bit about that development planning position and looking at separating community planning and looking at resourcing that to help provide for the capacity to ensure that that department can start to meet targets, more aggressive targets with respect to development applications, and keep ahead of the curve on its policy requirements. Workload management, there is a Gantt chart that the CAO has put in place. I think there's a new name for it, but I can't. Strategic projects, thank you. Very effective way of helping the board to understand and helping staff also understand the kind of the resource scarcity. That is that there are so many things we can do. We've got limited resources. We have to marshal those very carefully. I believe that the value of the chart will be enhanced when strategic planning is in place and the priorities have been set by the board, because then we can put align some of those projects with the board priorities as well. That's going to be helpful for staff, I believe, to understand, and for directors. I also think that if we talk about an electoral area services committee, getting back to governance, there is a role for that committee to play in helping to manage some of the trade-offs that exist that are inherent in that chart, in that big strategic projects chart. Right now, we've got a very long list of things that have to happen, and there's not a lot of direction from the board right now on which are more important than others. So I think providing that, and I think using the Electoral Area Services Committee as a forum to provide some of that direction and prioritizing for local projects, local area projects, and there are many of those on that long list that is being created, will be helpful. So that may add value to tool, the very good tool that's in place right now, that strategic projects list. With respect to, excuse me, risk management, core function across all jurisdictions, across municipalities and regional districts, it does require oversight by one group. It requires roll-up by one department. When I say roll-up, when we think of risk management, it's one of those functions that even though we may show it on a chart, it's more of a core skill that has to be present in every department. So every department is responsible for understanding the risks it faces and for coming up with ideas to mitigate those risks, eliminate those risks wherever possible, or to identify and deal with residual risks that we can't eliminate or mitigate, and how are we going to treat those. So the idea is to have the manager of financial operations, which is a new position within the finance department, to under the CFO, to start to build a risk registry using information with input from other departments, and to also develop some policy and processes for addressing and managing risk. Again, when we look across organizations across the sector, we're seeing much more emphasis on risk management and a more formal approach to risk management. It's not a huge approach. It can be started very small and grow over time, but having that discipline framework in place, in my view, would be helpful for the organization to consider. Front counter, you've got a front counter like most organizations, and there is a customer service initiative that has been in place for a little bit of time now to ensure that representatives of different public-facing services are present at the front counter to address questions of people when they come in and deal with the counter. It's a good way to enhance customer service, to build their brand, to build the reputation of the brand. I think it's a useful one-stop shop, but we see that in a lot of jurisdictions that have been created. And I think that there may be a need to work with the departments to ensure that there are no gaps up front. When somebody's not vacant, when somebody's away, move people up front. Make sure we've always got that presence, which is important. I would also consider giving this initiative like a more some light, a formal name, some profile, and creating a bit of an oversight group, which I understand is either underway or has been done now. Software, very important, and information systems, very important service, very important department, of course, critical function for the RDOS as it is in every organization going forward at this time in our existence, at least. We've got different needs in different departments to be thinking about software and to assist and make more efficient in providing services. We've got needs in financial services, for example. So we've got the potential to be taking on a new service as it relates to collecting taxes directly. Right now, that's through the province under the Surveyor of Taxes, which the regional district or the ratepayers of the regional district pay a bit for. That is underway. I think the board understands that. That is a potential source of revenue then to pay for some new software for finance, but also to look at software as it relates to development services potential, maybe not that using that same amount of revenue, but other opportunities are out there to increase efficiency. So how we're processing our development applications, how we are managing our records, which is important centralized function. We've got Bonfire as a software in place right now to deal with purchasing, which has been very helpful. As we get more into communications and intergovernment relations, so the client relation management software tools are going to be very important. And if we look across the organization, there's different areas where we need to be thinking about software solutions to increase efficiency. What I've suggested is a little bit of a plan, a 5-year plan by IS to start thinking about identifying opportunities and needs and start to figure out, let's give these in a little bit of order on how we're going to start to tackle some of these needs going forward. Bylaw enforcement, we've got a fairly slim group of bylaw enforcement officers, which is not terribly unique for regional districts. But we've got an approach that is maybe not fully into bylaw enforcement that's not fully understood by the directors or by the public, and some clarity around approach would be helpful in that respect. I think we look again at the Electoral Area Services Committee. There's an opportunity for that committee because we're dealing with bylaw enforcement in the unincorporated areas typically or almost exclusively. And there's an opportunity for that committee to give some direction to that function. We know that we've got a number of different bylaws in place. Every jurisdiction does. We also know that we're not going to be able to put equal time and energy into each of those bylaws. Every year or every couple of years, it's helpful to have the board or a subset of the board, in this case, the Electoral Area Services Committee, chime in to provide some direction on where the priorities are going to be for enforcing which bylaws. Is it going to be animal control for the period of time? Is it going to be building? Is it going to be these other things? Those kinds of decisions are made based on safety, based on public complaints, based on those kinds of things. But having that clarity and that direction on where we're going to focus those resources would be helpful. There's also a request, I believe, for bylaw coordinator, and I would second that request. And there's some software and hardware needs that could be applied to bylaw to ensure that our limited staff that we have in bylaw are in the field most of the time, the vast majority of time.
Question, Director Coyne?
Yeah, do you feel we're adequately staffed in bylaw? And we have as many bylaw officers for the entire regional district as the town of Princeton has. My original CAO said, don't have a bylaw unless you plan on enforcing it. So I don't feel like we are, but I want your take on that.
Thank you for the question. I think bylaw enforcement is one of those areas, like many in local government, where you could always use more. And I think it to some degree, it is a never-ending tap. If you have more, they will enforce more, and you'll get more complaints, and they'll enforce more. So every bylaw, every jurisdiction has a complaints-driven bylaw policy. And we're no different in that respect. So we don't proactively go and look for problems. We respond to complaints. We want to make sure that we have enough resources in place to respond to the most difficult complaints or the ones that are most serious. Do we have enough at 2? It's pretty slim. When I look at other regions like Cowichan Valley, they have 4. But they have a bigger population and so forth, and like you, a very large area. If we added a coordinator, especially we had a coordinator who could do some of that work as well, then we'd have 3, and I think that's probably a good start for now with some focus in terms of where we're going to put our priorities. We can put the Electoral Area Services Committee, if there is one, could identify too that we're going to focus for this next year on Similkameen, or we're going to focus on this part of the Okanagan area for these next 2 months, or we're going to focus on these issues. And I think that would really help to make the most out of a small team. Could you add more? Absolutely, but I don't think it's the area that is apart from the coordinator, that is the biggest need in the organization.
Continuing on.
Senior management team. So you've got a senior management team in place, as every jurisdiction does, as every government does, and your CAO is the chair of that team. Your managing directors are part of that, and often you have others come to that team to either as permanent members or as ad hoc members to deal with particular issues. The culture of the organization and the culture of the senior management team, as I mentioned earlier, has become much more positive in recent months, and I think that's very helpful. I think that when we look at a senior management team, it's not just an oversight body, it's also a decision-making body as it relates to the organization. So it's a bit of a policy body, it's a decision-making body. And helping to really clarify the potential, the full role for that team is helpful. And because we want, those are our top people, and we want to make sure that we are using all of that brain power to propel the organization. So how do we structure that team, and what terms of reference do we give that team to make sure it's most effective? And so I think what I've suggested is to create some terms of reference to really focus on the full role of that team and to give that team the focus that it needs to give the most to the organization. Project coordinators, we've got 3 coordinators under community services and 1 under infrastructure right now. I've suggested that we create a project management body or department in there too, or there may be benefits at least in consolidating that into a project management office. And that's one thing to consider. It could fit under community services. That's what I've suggested. It could fit under other groups as well. But having that capacity that can provide service across the organization would be helpful. Other regional districts have made that move as well, and it seems to be effective. And finally, intergovernmental relations. This function is going to become increasingly important. It's under our deputy CAO right now. I think that's a logical placement for it. Communications manager in place right now, a strong person in place, and the manager in place is a point person for that. There's some capacity now. That capacity will get used up. I suggest that the board may wish to revisit some potential additions to resources as you get into that function a little bit more. That may be 2026, it may be earlier, but I've put in 2026. I think it's also, as an interim step, helpful to create some policy and program infrastructure for that function before adding resources to it. And I'll pause there, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Is there any questions? Director Holmes.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if we have any idea on the budget implications of implementing the recommendations. And you note where we might want to consider adding resources, whether that's staff or software or whatever. But is there did you also look at where we could potentially reduce or consolidate resources? And I guess I understand it's an organizational efficiency review, but where does organizational efficiency align with cost efficiency?
Mr. Nielsen. Oh, do you want the CAO to try that one? Go ahead.
Can I try?
Oh, absolutely.
So each of these recommendations have been assigned either to myself or one of the managing directors to come back to the board with consequences. So one of the recommendations is a bylaw coordinator. That is in your FTE requests for 2025, and it's contingent on the organization accepting business licenses. So for instance, that specific one is neutral because the business license fees would fund that more in excess of the actual cost. But there will be reports coming on each one of the recommendations to you. And in some cases, it's cost neutral. In other cases, there may be a cost. And the third option too is a reduction, depending on what the staff comes up back with.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Holmes, following up.
Yeah, just follow up. And also, I wonder if any consideration was given to achieving efficiencies through shared services with municipalities. Or perhaps that was outside the terms of reference.
CAO.
I would say it was outside the term of reference, but we had a CAO meeting in this room Friday, and we actually talked specifically that shared references where we can have economies of scale. So there's actually one that we're working on right now that it will come to all of the councils and the regional district to see if we can make it work, and that would be economies of scale where we all would save money. So hopefully that's the first of many.
Okay, Director Monteith.
Thank you. Through the chair, Director Holmes, you stole my thunder because that was one of the big things I shared when I was speaking about this, because I think that there is opportunities for us to work better together, and we're not looking at those. So I am happy that we're looking at them because it's about time that we work together as a region.
Okay, any other questions? Not seeing any. Well, thank you, Mr. Nielsen, for coming in and presenting, and thanks for all the work you've put into this.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board.
Okay, moving on to development services. The first item on that is D1, which is a development variance permit in Area I, CAO.
Thank you, Chair. This application is seeking a variance to the front parcel line setback that applies to the subject property in order to undertake the construction of a garage, and the recommended motion is that the development variance permit 2024.029 to allow the construction of an accessory building at 453 Eastview Drive be approved.
Director Monteith.
Thanks. I'd like to make the administrative recommendation.
Okay, moved, seconded. Any discussion? Not seeing any hands, this is a rural vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. D2, a petition to enter service area in Area D, CAO.
Thank you. This applicant has submitted a petition requesting to the regional district that seeks to include an additional 33.6 hectares portion of the property at 1655 Maple Street, which is legally described as Lot B, KAP 22642, District Lot 551 in the Okanagan Falls Water Service Area. And the recommended motion is that the Okanagan Falls Water Service Establishment Amendment Bylaw 2978.02, 2024 being a bylaw to extend the Okanagan Falls Water Service Area to include an additional 33.6 hectares area of the land described as the lot, as I specifically said earlier, be read a first, second, and third time. Staff's here to answer your questions.
Okay, Director Taylor, direction on this?
I'd like to move the administrative recommendation strongly.
Moving it. Is there a seconder? It's on the floor. Any discussion on that? This is a corporate vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us down to community services. License of occupation in Area A, CAO.
Thank you. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to renew the 10-year over part of the bed of Osoyoos Lake to manage and maintain a public swimming area at Osoyoos Lake Park in electoral area A. Administrative recommendation is that the board agree to acquire the license for the term of 30 years from the province over the land on an unsurveyed crown foreshore being part of the bed of Osoyoos Lake and fronting on Lot 1, District 42, Similkameen Division Valley District, containing 1.4 hectares more or less of the proposed public swimming area.
I have someone to move that for me. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on this? This is just a renewal. Again, it's a corporate vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Over to legislative services. F1, select committees and external agency appointments, CAO.
Thank you. So each year, member of the board of directors are invited to submit expression of interest for appointments for the board select committees and external agencies that they are interested in, or to confirm their desire to maintain a position that they are currently in. Recommended motion is that the appointments to select committees and external agencies be adjusted in accordance with the attachment to the November 21st, 2024 administrative report.
Okay, direction on this? Moved it, seconded, thank you. Any discussion? Go ahead, Director Federico.
Thank you to the chair. So we've just been talking about the different committee structures. So is that something that we're going to address this year? Or are we just approving this and then not talking about it again? This is how it's going this year.
I would suspect we'll have to address that, but in the meantime, we do need to have these committees in place. And when that happens, it would be my understanding that we would have to remove some of those select committees and then potentially appoint or make a standing committee. But that's where it's kind of sitting at the moment. So this is for the select committees anyway. This is potentially temporary until we wrap our heads around what we want to do with the others. So. Any other discussion? Again, corporate votes. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Fees, charges, amendment bylaw, CAO F2.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to request to amend fees for yard waste disposal at the RDOS administered landfills, to amend Schedule 6 Parks and Recreation fees for increased clarity and accuracy, to add a new Schedule 13 electric vehicle charging user fee to allow for users to be charged for electrical vehicle charging. And the administrative recommendation is that bylaw number 3050.03, 2024, being a bylaw to amend the fees and charges bylaw, be read a first, second, and third time and be adopted.
Okay, Director Monteith.
Through the chair, I'm uncomfortable with some of the changes in my bylaw for fees. And I know that my commission hasn't seen them yet, and specifically my community association who owns the hall, and we're setting the fees for that. I have questions about the waste transfer fees. Like I feel like some work needs to be done on this. So is it possible to make a motion to have it sent to our commissions to have a look at? I don't know if other directors want that, but I know that I do.
I'll check with the CAO. Is this
Yes, that will work.
work? So the motion to send it to,
The Parks and Recreation Commissions and any other committees that are applicable. Like I have some concerns just
Okay,
about
I s-
language. So
I seen a couple of hands. Were you seconding that and adding yours commissions to it? Same for Director Taylor, okay. So the motion is to send it off to the committees, and I'm assuming those that want that should definitely contact probably Ms. Mulden? Is that fair enough? Go ahead, Director Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. This is just a question for Director Monteith. Do you have issues just with the amendment of Schedule 6, the Parks and Recreation Advisory fees, or do you also have issues with the amendment of fees for yard waste and for the electrical vehicle charging?
thank you. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Specifically, some questions about the Apex Waste Transfer Station and then the Parks and Recreation. So it's all together in one bylaw though, so it has to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the electrical charging, it was the other two. So we've got a motion to send it out to the committees. Again, corporate, all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us down to CAO reports. A verbal update, CAO?
Very quickly, with the request, we requested the 6 municipalities and 4 First Nations to allow us to use their logo on the one region working together. I'd like to thank Asuyas and Summerland for the only 2 that so far have approved or allowing us to use their logo. So just want to make sure that maybe the rest of the municipal directors here can look at taking it back to their councils and seeing if we'd be allowed to use it.
Okay. Thank you. And I think there was one other item there. Ms. Mulden, do you want to
Thanks,
clarify?
Chair. So at the last board meeting, on inaugural meeting, we passed the schedule of meetings for the year. And we went with a first and third Thursday of every month. And that included January. That was actually a mistake in the report, and I should have picked up that the board doesn't generally like to start off the new year on January 2nd with a board meeting. Hasn't been successful to date. So we should have moved those back 1 week. Now, January has 5 weeks, so it's easily accommodated. So what if the board does not want to start out on January 2nd, a motion to move those January meetings to January 9th and January 23rd, a motion would be appropriate now.
Okay, I see a mover for that. Is there a seconder? It's on the floor. Do we need to discuss that? I don't really feel like meeting on the 2nd if we can avoid it, so sounds good to me. I'll call the question. Corporate, all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Anything further, CAO?
I think
All right, that brings us down to the chair's report. I would just mention that, I think it was last Friday, I attended the collaborative leadership table signing agreement and was fairly well attended. And I actually seen a few directors there. I believe Director Taylor was one who came to watch, so much appreciated. And I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, working together with all the municipalities, regional districts, and native bands in the Okanagan and Similkameen to come up with some projects to work on. Director's motions. Any director's motions that we're looking at? Director Coyne, go ahead.
I don't know how to, can we send a letter to invite our new MLA to meet with us, since our 2 MLAs maybe to meet with us?
That's probably,
Does it need to
I'm
be?
not sure when and how, but we should probably get to know them. Thoughts on that, CAO or Ms. Mulden?
So we do have a rough idea of when we'd like to invite them for. We're just letting them sort of get settled first, but yeah, the goal will be to meet them at least annually and very soon.
Okay, so
Early
it
in the
don't
new
sound
year.
like we need a motion for that. It's kind of in the works. Perfect. Any other director's motions before I move on? Seeing none. Board members' verbal updates. Anything from your communities that you want to report on? Go ahead, Director Coyne.
Yeah, so the other day through SILGA, I'm on the legislative reform for the Local Government Act Working Group. And we met the other day and we're going to dive deeper into this, and Don Lidstone's working with us to try to come up with a new version of, proposed new version of the Local Government Act to modernize it, since regional districts haven't changed since 1966. And the community charter changed municipalities from the municipal act to the charter. And there's been a lot of changes, as you know, with the way government works and the way the downloading's taken place. So this is an initiative off of the, I believe, the island. And they reached out to all the other area associations, and we are now meeting regularly to try to put something in action. We hope to have initial reports out early January and bring it to all the area association AGMs in the spring.
Okay, thanks for that. Anybody else have anything to report on from your communities or otherwise? Not seeing any hands, we'll go down to board representations. Through the list here, Municipal Finance Authority. Nothing really to report on. The next meeting for that is, I believe, in April. Nothing from MIA, Okanagan Basin Water Board. Anything there, Director Holmes?
We did have a meeting in November 5th or something like that. I don't have a whole lot to report, just there was a lot of talk on the International Soyuz Lake Board of Control annual meeting. And Director McCorduff would be better to speak to that because she was part of that meeting. Yeah, I think that's about all I have. Sorry.
Okay, well, no worries. Director Coyne, anything from the Film Commission?
Yeah, we had our AGM finally. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a mess because the time was set, but the platform didn't work. And so we had to try to get everybody in, and everybody was reelected as they were. It was done on the side of the road. So it was a bit of a mess, but that's only, I think, the second or third meeting we've had this year. So it's been a struggle to get everybody together.
All right. Okanagan Regional Library, is that going to be Director Federico? Go ahead.
Yes, so we had a meeting yesterday. So they had taken under a big cybersecurity review. So based on Calgary and Toronto being hit, they just wanted to make sure that our systems were solid. And the good news is that they are. They're very happy with the current IT department and where they're at there. They've allocated the remaining of their provincial grants. So the remaining RDOS facilities to get grant funding is Kaleden, who will be getting $15,000 for a circulation desk, and Headley will be getting $5,000 for a circulation desk. And then they're also undertaking an external review of exempt staff positions.
Okay, thank you for that. Anything from SIR, Director Bush?
No, but I have a meeting tomorrow morning.
Okay. Simia, anything there, Director Knodel?
All is quiet.
All is quiet. Starling Control, Director Bush?
Yeah, nothing. I haven't heard of any meetings lately.
Okay. The Economic Trust, Southern Interior, Director McCordoff isn't here. Anything, either Director Johansson or Bloomfield?
I'll just say that there's a regional advisory committee meeting scheduled for November 29th, and that's where the fall projects funding will be approved for the fall projects. There'll be a recommendation coming forward.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't believe there's any items coming out of close that we need to deal with, so looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? We are adjourned. And I believe we do have some time to go into Corporate Services Committee. We're a half an hour behind, but we will hopefully make up some time here. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved, seconded, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Regional survey results. Do we have the person presenting on that ready to go? I'll turn it over to the CAO to start us.
Thank you. As you stated, Mr. Thompson's here to provide survey results and recommendations for the results, and that the recommended motion that the regional district conduct further review of the 2024 regional survey results and consider implementation of recommendations. And as you can see, we have staff here prepared to answer any questions.
Okay, go ahead.
To the chair, I have prepared a very short slideshow. It's not very exciting, but it's a slideshow, and it will help illuminate what we're talking about here. First of all, there you see a new map that we've created. We took in communications, we took the initiative to include the Syilx Okanagan communities on the map. They were not previously on there, and we have various versions of maps, but this is our public-facing map, so we thought it should be more accurate and representative of the area. We'll go to slide 2. So this survey, I'm not a pollster myself, but I was asked by the CAO to conduct the survey this year. Again, we usually do it every 2 years as an organization. There you can see a breakdown. This slide and the next slide are two versions of, two ways of looking at the participation level. Lots of participation, as you can see there from Area I. We had a total of 551 responses in 2024. Not exactly amazing, but better than in previous years. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see another way of looking at who participated and how. Again, this survey was previously conducted every 2 years, so this year we brought it together fairly quickly. It is a challenge, and there are a lot of questions that come up about surveys. Why are they being conducted? What are the costs and those types of things? I'd like to say that I believe we kept the costs as low as possible for this one. If we go to slide number 4, you'll see it was conducted between September 10th and October 4th, 2024. We, in communications, used all the platforms we had available to promote it. We also created a short and fun YouTube video. We shared information with the media, and local media were very good about picking up this content as what we called editorial content versus just ads, which we also did. And not surprising, some of the key themes from this year's survey, if we go to slide 5, were communication, two-way communication. And I think people often, we don't always talk about two-way communication. It's one thing for the regional district or local governments to communicate to the public and share information and be transparent, but it's important to receive information and act on it. Customer service, of course, is another real key element. I added a couple of comments in here. Now, all of you, I know, have probably spent a lot of time reading the report and the results and the comments. I find that the comments are some of the most telling. These were a few that I just pulled out that I just briefly wanted to discuss. It's an interesting, I think these are examples of the challenges in local government that we face. The government of any level is not the best entity to manage a water system, was one comment. Now, when people say things like that, to me, there's a lot hidden in there. Well, maybe it's not even hidden, that we have to consider is that if there are concerns about any of the services or programs that the RDOS offers, it's worth looking at. And when we jump ahead later to the recommendations, you'll see that's why I think we need to look at considering some reviews of different services. Another challenge when we talk about communications, at the very bottom there, someone said, I am not aware of my local government website. As many of you know, I do spend a lot of time, unfortunately, more than we'd like to, in the Emergency Operations Center when there are emergencies impacting local residents. And when that happens, there are two different elements that come to play. One is that the local government has to really be proactive at getting information to people, but the public also has to do their part to make sure they know where to find it and how they can find it. So I just wanted to isolate a few of these comments. One of them, again, was the use of Voyant Alert. We try to use Voyant Alert as best we can to make sure that it's more proactive in getting information out. Some people don't feel it should be used for anything other than emergencies, but we as an organization, as you know, the board has opted to use it for both routine notifications and for emergencies. Again, this goes to where we as an organization really have to communicate better with people to say, you need to go into your Voyant Alert account and check the boxes that you would like to receive information about. And the one that you don't have an option to opt out of is emergency notification. If we can jump to the next slide, please, Anna. So recommendations, certainly these are dependent on capacity and staffing, and we can touch on some of these things as an organization, but not all of them are quick fixes. But service analysis and review is one thing that the organization might want to look at for specific areas where people have expressed concerns or where we already know there may be some challenges. Communications will work with departments to create checklists, and building and planning in particular, there's just so many moving parts and so many elements, and there are time and financial constraints for the residents and customers, we'll call them, who are coming in. So having a checklist will really help. And I'll give you a quick example of that. If someone phones in and asks a question, the checklist can help identify things that we as an organization should be sharing with them. Have you checked this? Do you have these maps? So we don't leave it to the customers to try and figure that out. providing educational material right across the board. A quarterly newsletter is something we'd like to establish. We've looked at it before, but again, I'm not 100% sure capacity-wise that people know what goes on in communications and engagement, but there are a lot of touch points. We'll make this work because we need to. I've talked about this before briefly, but video Q&A segments during an emergency, we have video briefings that are real-time and seem to be quite effective. So maybe this is something we could look at down the road, and maybe even partnering with municipalities to deal with big regional issues or pressing issues and concerns. Provide people an opportunity to call in, and they don't have to have all the technology available, just a phone to participate in something like that. We have created in communications an Instagram and Threads account, both of them. We are not currently using them, and it is because if we're going to do it, we want to do it right. And capacity is challenging to populate Instagram properly. I do want to give a shout out to the city of Penticton. They use Instagram really effectively, and it's a different kind of medium than Facebook or Twitter or X. We're going to add Blue Sky. I don't know if you've heard of that. There's a new social media platform out there. We can look at that down the road. But anyway, I'd like to launch Instagram and Threads sooner than later. And my recommendation for next year or the next time we do a regional survey is to engage a professional research team to do it because they have the resources and the knowledge to really do it properly. We have, over the years, looked at the fact that you can't phone somebody on their phone anymore because most people don't have a landline, but there are ways to do it through the mail, assuming there's not a postal strike. And next slide, please. So next steps will be to implement some of these recommendations that we've looked at, and we can certainly discuss that. The next survey, either 2025 or 2026, up to the board, and establish a budget for that survey. We understand the cost to have a professional firm engaged would be approximately $13,000 to $15,000 Canadian. And further review of the results is something that we certainly encourage all directors, managers, and staff to look at. And with that, we'll move to the final slide for questions and feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Looking to the board for any questions or thoughts on this. Director Barkwell?
The comment that they were not aware of the RDOS website, which I think is a pretty good website, was kind of telling. I mean, with the paper going down to 3 days a week and, communications changing completely, do you have it really featured prominently on all of your communications for further information? Just a question.
Go ahead.
To the chair, absolutely. And there is a conference going on in Penticton right now, Building Resilient Communities, and I was part of a panel discussion with the media, and Chris Walker from CBC and Chelsea Powery from Castanet, who are both very well versed in these matters, were there. And the conversation came up about a lack of media resources. Where are people going to get information if we have a shrinking media landscape? I brought up the point that they can get it directly from the source, but it is up to the source, local governments, to make sure we do a really, really good job of making that information available in a timely manner. So long answer, but to answer your question, yes, the RDOS website and the RDOS Regional Connections interactive website are always promoted.
Okay, Director Taylor?
Yeah, I just really feel we should caution ourselves that whether we've got 80,000 people and is the population, or we're just looking at the proportion that's outside of the municipalities and it's whatever that number is, 551 responses isn't going to give us any level of statistical comfort. Or that's my concern. And I think really this is good anecdotal information, but I think that despite what the graphs look like, we should be really cautious about using this as a measure of what people think.
Okay. Comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to point too, there were two versions. So there was the general public survey that anybody could go and take. And then there was the what we call statistically significant version, which was mailed out to people. And the response rate for that was not awesome for either of them. It is anecdotal, absolutely.
Okay. Director Holmes?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is we can get the anecdotal feedback just, every day. So I'm not sure if we need a survey to get us anecdotal. I also not sure, I mean, I guess we'll discuss this at budget time, but I'm not really sure if we need to spend up to $15,000 for a professional one either at this time. I think it's time to tighten our belts a little bit.
Okay, Director Coyne?
Yeah, to the anecdotal, I mean, people saying they don't know about our website, the regional district website is one of the oldest websites in the Okanagan. I mean, you hear this every time that there's information put out. Oh, I didn't know about it. Well, it was in the paper, it was on our website, it was on our social media, it was on the bulletin board. Well, I didn't know. Well, come on, like, I'm tired of hearing that excuse, and I don't know, I agree with Director Holmes. I mean, I'm surveyed out, everybody's surveyed out. Every time you turn around, there's another survey. I think there's other ways that we can grab this information. Just our stats off of our social media and web count will tell us if people are actually paying attention. I don't think we have to go to this extent. Thanks.
Okay, Director Bloomfield?
Yeah, and thank you. And as far as getting feedback from the public and the communities, at the city of Penticton, we've had public open houses now for the past 3 or 4 years, and they've been extremely successful. And you know, you make it an event, you make it family friendly, you make it so that you know, people can be engaged. Obviously, you do get people showing up that have, you know, a beef with the city or you know, an axe to grind, but you get a lot of good general feedback as well. The only true way you're going to get unbiased feedback is to actually do full surveys, which is very costly. So I'm not sure that there's an appetite to go that route, but I think that the open houses that we've done at the city have been much more effective than general surveys.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Director Graham.
Yeah, thank you to the chair and to Director Bloomfield's comments with open house. The open house for the city of Penticton have been incredible, to the fact that you're getting people off the keyboard and coming to chat with you, and it's a great opportunity to educate those folks. And two, you know, you get the comments of the 500. The 500, in my opinion, being in a social media background, that's actually not too bad at all. We do here at the city of Penticton engagement, and sometimes I see the numbers and it's startling how low they are. So the last year within this RDOS, I think the social media sites have really refocused and have got a lot more traction. And I do believe spending a little bit of money to get that dialed in moving forward is going to be incredibly important for this organization, based on how do we articulate the messages to the masses when you do have a lack of media. Some media are great, some aren't. And so I'm of the opinion, yeah, to spend a little money to get this to finally to the goal line, it's going to help every director, area director, to reshare, to get those people in your communities onto those platforms. Again, you can't lead a horse to water, but to Director Coyne's comments, we're doing everything we can. So when you put the onus on your individuals in those communities and you're sharing those links to them, if they want to go on them and use them, perfect. If they don't, that's on them. Thank you.
Okay. Director Federico?
Thank you to the chair. Can the city of Penticton please advise us on how many people are in their communications department?
Director Bloomfield, you got to
Take a wild guess. I think it's about 4.
Okay, so thank you. So we are a team of currently 2, maybe a third person who pops in and out, and others that are in there. So for the size of our organization and the size of that department, they're doing a great job. There is an onus on residents to go online and find information. I know in previous, when I worked in positions, there was events we held outside of people's houses. And unless you knock on everybody's door and stare them in the face to give information, information will get missed. That's just, you know, how it goes. So I think then if bolstering communication is what we want to do, then as we move forward into budgeting, then we definitely need to understand that that department right now is doing the best they can with their resources, and us as directors as well, you know, managing our time. I've done a couple of town halls and open houses, and it's usually just me there in front of a crowd of, last time was about 50 or so, and they come, you know, unhappily. So we would gladly put our faces out there to our residents. We do it daily, but just as we head into budget, just remember that that support in that department would be greatly appreciated.
Director Coyne.
Yeah, I guess a question to, I don't know if it's for Eric or not, but do you guys have a comprehensive, like, media plan or communications plan right now where you're focusing in on specific social media and other mediums, especially with, global TV going, almost extinct, and our papers are all, falling apart and everything else. It's getting harder and harder. So have you guys adapted to that, and are you guys planning for that? And like, do you need more? Like, if we're going to spend this money on surveys, I'd rather spend it on a communications plan that we can actually action than just looking for the same answers that we always get.
Eric?
To the chair, the focus really is, there's no one size fits all, as you know. So certainly social media is always really important. Facebook is surprisingly active. And if you don't put information on there, especially during an emergency, you get the void of whoever else puts information there. So I wouldn't say we have a communication plan that's specifically focusing on one area. It's focusing on all of the areas. I know from the CAO and the deputy CAO, the focus for 2025 is to get out into communities. I recently went to an after action review in Princeton, and we actually got to talk to people from the community of Eastgate eye to eye, and it made a huge difference. We received follow-up emails from them. That's what we need to do, is really focus not just on one area, but in communities, for example, and then social media as well, but all combined, because it really isn't one size fits all. But it's an important reminder about the power of social media.
Okay, follow up, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the comments was the voyant alerts being used for non-emergency stuff. And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Voyant Alert because I get the same complaints, right? We use it for, we're closing the bridge, and then people, well, this is an emergency. It's like, no, it's not. It's just, we're trying to get information out to you and everything else. And I don't know, like, are we putting, I don't know what the question is. I'm just like, I'm frustrated with Voyant Alert. I know Director Gettins wants us to use Voyant Alert more. I feel like Voyant Alert is losing its place because we're using it for everything. And I know I ignore it half the time now when it goes off in my community because I'm like, it's probably just a bridge or a water outage in somewhere. And usually, well, it always is, right? But so when the emergency happens, it doesn't come across. I use another one now that I get from the province, and I get that update. And that one, when it goes off, I know it's the emergency and it's not a water update.
Okay, Ms. Molden?
Just to expand on that, so the communication strategy, which was developed a few years ago and brought to the board for adoption, is where we would find the tools to indicate how we're communicating through social media. So that'll be coming back to the board shortly, along with the Voyant Alert policy, which talks about all of those details in that. And we will be looking for guidance from the board as to whether it's still effective in its current form or not. So those two documents will be back to the board probably by year's end, or if not, shortly thereafter, and that conversation can be had deeper.
Okay, Director Monteith and then Taylor.
Thank you. Through the chair, I love Director Bloomfield's idea of those open house strategies. And as elected area directors, we have those, but it's just us standing there. There's no staff. Or we may have a finance meeting, we have finance there, but there's questions of other services. Is there a way to be more efficient with those public meetings, those town hall meetings, to have other staff present that provide services? Because that is where we have the audience. So there's an interest, but there's nobody supporting us. So how do we get that support?
Ms. Molden?
I can answer that one if you'd like. Yes, we would love to get out in the communities in a more concerted way, where we, pull 2 or 3 or 4 different departments and organize them. That's a ton of work, and it's work we want to do. We don't have a resource for that at the moment. That is a coordinator or an event individual who takes that and pulls it all together and makes sure everything's, organized and ready to go with all of the different groups. And the reason we haven't been doing it as well as we want to do it is we don't have the resource at the moment.
Okay, Director Taylor?
Yeah, similar vein. I hear Penticton and Princeton talking, and we're just very different animals. And I know you know that, but like, how are you going to get our staff out, even just to a meeting in Caramias, and then a meeting in OK Falls and a meeting in Oliver for Area C? Like, it's just a ton of work. I don't know how to do it. The open houses are really good. But if you don't feed Facebook, you know, there's a lot of people on that, and each little tiny community's got 3 or 4 Facebook pages that people avidly follow and populate with their tangential thought processes. And if you don't corral them, yeah, so maybe this is a subject for our infant electoral area committee.
Could be. Director Bloomfield?
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, really good discussion, I think, actually, because what I'm hearing is that, you know, a lot of the electoral areas, they like the idea of an open house, but it's just the resource question. And so it's good for staff to hear those discussions, and, you know, that feedback. And it's for staff really to see if they can come up with some answers, solutions. You know, maybe it's, you know, engaging with your, you know, advisory planning committees and making sure they're there to, you know, keep you company and give you some support. But yeah, and the staff are a big part of the city open house. No question about that. You know, so we have. I think if you've got, you know, some protective services there with you. You know, you got your fire department, you got your RCMP. You got somebody from the RDOS, you got your APCs, then, you know, you probably, and if you got 50 people showing up in a community like Naramata, that's a really great turnout. That's good engagement.
Director Taylor?
Well, you know, following on that, I mean, like garbage, I mean, we had over 150 people, you know, so maybe we have those kind of things on a regular basis or more frequent, populated by staff, brought to us by staff, and then we have a Q&A afterwards or something like that for more general discussions. Because you're right, those very focused things that are well built are very often quite, you know, really well attended and very much appreciated by us as directors.
Okay, CAO?
So these public meetings, great. I've been involved in a lot working for municipalities, and it's not just finance, it would be all of the other major departments. The issue with regional district is we have 9 electoral areas, with some electoral areas having more than one location. I'll use Caledon as an example, where you'd have one in Caledon and one in Apex, because that's where the population is. It would have to be properly planned. So the roadshow for the budget is going to start in January, for instance. That's a done deal. That's something that we will do with the 6 municipalities and the 9 electoral areas. And in some cases, some don't want any, but usually it works out to be about 12 for electoral areas and plus the 6. So that's something that we can plan to do more than just, and we are planning that more than just a budget. So you can have more than one part of the departments. But to have it ongoing, these meetings would have to be either on the weekend and at night, and you're talking about capacity. So earlier we were talking about the personal donated time. That's something that's expected of the exempt staff, but there's a point where you have to look at it and look at what's good for the population and what's good for the staff.
Okay, all good points. Something else, Eric? Go ahead.
To the chair, just quickly, for meetings, we had talked about for the budget potentially having weekend 4 Saturdays, for example, in February after first reading, to be able to have a group meeting of all the different departments and sections. But to put that together is quite an effort. But also with Facebook, most local governments don't go into those Facebook community groups. What they do is they make sure they post accurate information on their own Facebook page and website, and then it's up to others, hopefully community champions and others, who can then populate it on those, I don't know what you call them, community groups. I was thinking of Rant and Rave, but that's a brand name, I think.
Rant and Rave. That would probably be a popular one. All right. Seeing nothing further there, we'll move on to the next. Thanks, Eric, for that update on that survey results. Silga, call for resolutions. Am I going to the CAO on this, or Ms. Malden?
Christy?
Sure.
So it's that time of year again where we need to start thinking about SILGA, preparing for that event, and any resolutions that we would like to put forward to SILGA in order to advance them to UBCM. We implemented the new system of a report for UBCM. We'd like to do the same for SILGA as well. And so if the board can start to think now, we're going to press this really hard, probably the last meeting in December and starting early after Christmas, so that we have time to prepare those reports for SILGA. So anything the board is thinking about, let's talk about it every meeting from now until then, until the deadline occurs. And that way then we have the opportunity to get material together that we need to present a very clear report on each of these items to SILGA. So we included in Appendix A the items from last year, just to sort of twig everybody's memory on that. And we are open to receiving any sort of thoughts or questions or anything on resolutions that we may take forward to SILGA. And we'll bring them forward each meeting. However we receive them in, we'll make sure each meeting we bring them forward for discussion.
Okay, Director Coyne?
Yeah, so resolutions dominate a lot of our time at the UBCM the other day. There's almost 180 resolutions this year. That's 180 resolutions we're going to take to the province and give to them, and most likely, you know, eventually maybe hear some feedback on them. This is every year. So going forward, I think like the best suggestion, because everybody's struggling with this, all the area associations are struggling with this, UBCM struggling with this, and British Columbia is the only province that does this the way we do it, is when we're thinking about our resolutions, try to really think about them as a regional thing. Think about them as something, if we've submitted it before, probably avoid it because there's already stuff in the works, and try to really focus in on the big items right now. You know, we have committees at UBCM to deal with the resolutions. All the resolutions that pass at SILGA get passed on to UBCM, and then we try to action them all, but it's just almost impossible. So just be aware of that when you're thinking about your resolutions and how to proceed with them, because, you know, if we have 50 resolutions, you know, over the last couple of years, those resolutions are already being worked on, they're being taken forward, and the province already has them on their list. So just things to think about, because everybody's getting so overwhelmed with the resolutions that it's almost to a point where what we're hearing back is that the province is kind of like, we talked about this before. So yeah, that's the best I can offer right now.
Okay, so this is just a heads up that we get our resolutions in sooner rather than later. Director Holmes?
Just a question for Director Coyne. I'm wondering if UBCM, you're on the UBCM board now, right? Yeah. I was wondering if it's ever entertained at UBCM that they'll only that any resolution has to go through the regional, it has to be passed through the regional one before it's, because right now you can submit it directly to UBCM, correct?
Yeah, so there was some discussion, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There was some discussion about this, like how do we deal with this, right? Because everybody's overwhelmed. I mean, we did strategic planning the first day, and I would probably wager almost an hour of our conversation was how, you know, we're struggling with resolutions because we're all feeling, and I mean, that's all I heard at convention is resolutions are failing us, right? So, you know, we brought those forward, and they're not sure how to deal with this yet. So that was one of the discussions, was if it should go through our area associations and then come forward. But there's a lot of municipalities and regional districts just bypass and go straight to the UBCM. And that's where we get all these ones that, you know, kind of really weigh everything down and that. So until there's a policy change, I mean, that's not going to happen. And it doesn't move fast at UBCM either.
Okay. Seeing no other hands, looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Now we are behind schedule, and we've got one more committee meeting. here, I'm just going to ask the chair, is this one that we need to deal with today, or should we wait until we see how the next meetings go and deal with it after that, if that works? But I see Ms. Bloomfield, who's probably presenting on this, sitting here. Is she CAO?
I'm hearing that, Chair, I'm hearing that they need a letter of support, so it can't wait.
Okay. Well, it's going to have to wait, though, till after lunch, I think, and then we'll deal with it first. So there is a wait, but not all that long. So we'll break for lunch and then hit that one first. Well, I didn't think so either, and we added because we knew we were probably going to run late, but irregardless, we'll deal with this. But
I don't know what Dan's, I mean, he's the delegation.
yeah, we'll start one, and if we have to, we'll do it after the hospital meeting. That's all. Yep.
We can have a delegation slide next to the community. So how about we do community, hospital, and then
Environment.
and then environment
And I
after
think
that.
that's what I was just discussing with him,
Perfect, okay.
so
Great
that
minds
works.
think alike. I'll
Let them
you
know, and then they've kind of got a better time frame rather than sitting here twiddling their thumbs, wondering and getting disappointed. Works. Okay, I got the thumbs up from Adam. We are ready to go here, and it just turned 12:30, so I'm going to turn it over to Director Monteith to start us with the Community Services Committee meeting. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting Community Services to order, please. I'll have a motion to approve the agenda. First, second, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Moving over to item B, we have a delegation regarding the extreme heat. So we have Robin Hawker, thank you, from Associate Principal from Climate Resilience, provide an update on the extreme heat presentation to the committee. So a little bio. So Robin Hawker is a professional planner and leads in Troba, thank you, Canadian Climate Resilience practice. She's a consultant lead at the RDOS Extreme Heat Resilience Planning Project and has supported similar work across other parts of British Columbia. Robin is a certified risk assessment professional who has specialized in climate resilience and built environment design and retrofit. She draws on a decade of experience leading risk assessments for building and infrastructure to inform community, regional, and national policy to move the needle in a better resilient design practices across the province and private building sector. Over to the delegate, please.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you. Sincerest thanks, and thank you all for having me here today. Thank you to the chair and the CAO and all of the board members for welcoming me to share the findings and the outcomes from a really exciting piece of work that I had the honor to support the RDOS on over the past year. So I was the consulting project manager for this work, but I was supported by an incredible team of folks at Introba and our sub-consultants at Liquor Geospatial, as well as Reimagine Architects, who led a very holistic and integrated assessment and planning process. Overseeing all of this work and providing incredible leadership was Matthew Weller from RDOS and Shane Houlihan. Unfortunately, they're not able to be here today. Matthew just had a baby, and Shane is the emergency management manager, and I'm sure is very busy with emergency response right now. So I'm here to represent the team and share out on the good work. All right, so I'll see if this, oh, there we go. Okay, so I know that as the snow starts falling on the hills, we're all thinking about our next ski trips and getting our sleds out of storage and starting to plan for snow response, snow clearance, and extreme cold weather shelters. But I'll ask you to transport yourself back in time to this past summer, or even further back to the heat dome in 2021, because right now is really the time we should be talking about and preparing for summer extreme heat. And so we started this project, or we embarked on this project, looking at the context of the Okanagan in the experience of that heat dome in 2021. And as I'm sure many of you remember, during that extreme heat event, it caused over 600 deaths directly related from heat across the province. And the good news was that a very small portion of those deaths were recorded in the Okanagan region. And so we really started this work recognizing that there is a baseline of resilience in this region, in large part due to the fact that you are familiar with warm summers and hot temperatures. There's a higher percentage of air conditioning in your buildings. But as we dug further into the work, into the analysis and the engagement, we found that this doesn't tell the whole story. And we actually found that there is a significant amount and opportunity for enhancing resilience through measures that you can all lead within your communities and at the community collaborative scale. And so this work, while we focused on extreme heat, we also recognize the deep interconnection between different extreme hazards. So we also looked at how extreme heat can cascade into and amplify the negative impacts from drought, not only on the economy, but also on infrastructure systems, as well as the interconnection with extreme heat, drought, and wildfire. And so though the drought and wildfire dimension weren't a key focus of this work, we did weave that in throughout all phases of the project. So our project included the intersection between detailed technical analysis, mapping, and engagement of community representatives as well as local experts within this space. And so that engagement, mapping, and analysis led into a 3-phase assessment process. There was a focus parks assessment, which involved site visits to 15 parks across the region that were identified by the advisory committee that we worked with and that guided this process. We also conducted a buildings assessment where we visited 5 community buildings that had potential to serve as extreme heat relief centers. And then we used all of the input and the outcomes from those parks assessments and building assessments, the engagement and the mapping, all of that fed into a holistic impact assessment that helped us identify what the greatest risks and threats are across the South Okanagan Similkameen region, and identify opportunities that you can build on the good work that you're already doing and build beyond that work to address any gaps or additional resilience measures that you could be implementing. And then we released the final report. And I do want to emphasize here that this effort, we realized that what we were aiming towards was not to develop a plan, because recognizing that this is at the regional scale, the report does not specify expectations on any one participant or local government. Rather, we see this as a toolkit, a summary of what the regional context is and experience has been on extreme heat, and a set of measures that you all could consider moving forward with to best reflect the objectives within your individual communities and also leverage collaboration across the region. Before I move on, I want to emphasize that though this work was led by the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen, it was overseen by a committed group of advisory committee members who represented the 9 jurisdictions shown on this slide here, including the Village of Keremeos, Osoyoos, District of Summerland, Oliver, and Town of Princeton, as well as 3 of the local nations, including the Upper Similkameen Indian Band, Osoyoos Indian Band, and Lower Similkameen Indian Band. All right. Our understanding was Penticton was leading its own parallel process and actually has been reflected in the analysis and some of the outcomes from our work. So the work was really founded on a robust engagement process where we sought to set up a coordinated effort to reach out to representatives from each community, but to ensure that that engagement was tailored to the key objectives, the messaging, and the context within each community. So we distributed a region-wide survey. We also held 5 workshops spanning each of the partner communities. And then we held 4 virtual workshops to reach out to key economic and service providing sectors across the region to get their input on how extreme heat has been affecting them and what opportunities they see for resilience. And so this is where we really started to get a peek at the real story in the region. And what we heard through the survey was that 87% of respondents have faced negative impacts from extreme heat, and 34% of respondents felt that their home did not provide adequate protection. The greatest concerns raised by respondents was concern about impacts to pets, as well as the orientation and location of their house in high heat areas, and concern about the health and well-being of seniors and other vulnerable populations in their household. And then 36% of respondents indicated that they have faced barriers in accessing existing extreme heat response services across the region. And in those in-person workshops, we heard more vignettes and direct experiences from folks about how extreme heat has been affecting them. Some folks said that they hadn't turned their air conditioners on because they were worried about the costs it would have on their household income. Others said that they were concerned about whether community centers had backup power so that they could continue to provide cooling during a power outage scenario. As well as folks were worried about whether they could even access cooling centers because of the distance between their home and limited access to transportation options. And then we also spoke with folks in the economic sector, learning about how extreme heat events have affected tourism and agriculture, and really put that as a focus in the work and the resilience recommendations we've made. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a map that shows the first level of mapping analysis that was carried out by Licker Geospatial. This map shows what the land surface temperatures were during the heat dome across the region. This data is from NASA source satellite imagery, remote sensing, and helps to pinpoint which areas are more susceptible to heat just based on their landscape characteristics. And so the key dimensions that we found through this analysis that have led to a higher heat exposure is lower lying areas, so in the valley, which to some degree the heat may have been mitigated by the proximity to large water bodies, but also urban areas with more buildings that have more glass and spit out heat and have more pavement, facing higher temperatures than more rural areas or areas with green space. And then the next set of mapping analysis that was carried out was a socio-vulnerability assessment. And so what this map shows is a combination of census data that illustrates where more vulnerable people are located. And the specific vulnerability indicators were selected based on those found to make people more vulnerable to extreme heat impacts. And so the key parameters that were looked at included health challenges as well as household age, recognizing that seniors faced more negative impacts during the heat dome and generally are more vulnerable. It also looked at the degree to which individuals may be able to respond to the heat event based on their education level, their household size and type, as well as their income. Yes.
Thank you. We have a question from Director Coyne.
Yeah, thank you. So that little map there, Princeton, you have this really high area of vulnerability, but almost all of it is unpopulated. So how does that work?
So great question. So this was based on census areas, and so the populations are distributed across the census area that was evaluated. So you can see like the orange area around Princeton, that's a relatively lower populated area. So it doesn't mean that every single area that is touched as orange means there's a person there who's vulnerable. But in general, the distribution of people that do live in that area are at that level of vulnerability. So we did find that there was a higher degree of, pretty consistently and across the board, that there was a higher level of vulnerability in more urban, more densely populated areas. All right. And so then we took the outcomes from engagement and from the mapping, and we brought all that together with the qualitative and narrative feedback we got from folks on the ground. And we carried out an impact assessment to basically identify what are the most significant risks that should be priorities to address. And so this, you can see on the screen, is the framework that we used. It's an adaptation from a traditional risk assessment framework. The difference here is that instead of assessing the likelihood of a heat event, we instead compared the ability at which the region is able to adapt. So the assessment was based on how bad the impact could be on the region and the degree to which you already have measures in place to respond to that type of impact. And these are the key priorities, the highest impact items that came out of that assessment. And it was assessed under 4 categories of regional services. So in terms of impacts to people and health, of course, we found that impacts to physical and mental health was a key concern, as well as the impact that extreme heat can have on cultural spaces and the ability for folks to access cultural spaces and practices during those events, which can affect well-being. We also noted the increased demand for first responders during these extreme heat events and the potential trauma and negative health impacts on responders who are responding in very hot and potentially unsafe environments. And then we also noted the increased demand for emergency services more generally. In terms of impacts to the environment, we noted the impact that extreme heat and drought can have on reducing water levels, which of course can have ecological impacts. We noted increased dieback of species and the increase of invasive species filling the gaps as more native species are dying back and negatively affected. And then we noted in particular how extreme heat and drought can cause dieback of bank stabilizing vegetation, which can then increase the risk of landslide and slope instability. And then, of course, that interlinkage between heat, drought, and wildfire. For built infrastructure, we noted how extreme heat events can cause overheating in buildings, especially older or south-facing buildings, or buildings that are providing services during smoke events where you might want to keep the windows closed, but it's still hot inside. We also noted that there are no official cooling centers near Little Shuswap Indian Band, Lower Similkameen Indian Band, Upper Similkameen Indian Band, Carmios, and Princeton. And we noted the challenges with this broad region and the transportation, public transit that's available to get people to medical services and cooling when it's not safe for them to walk or bike or use the transportation they typically use. We noted the impact of drought on fire flow capacity and the difficulty of providing air-conditioned spaces, especially if that coincides with a regional brownout that can happen due to increased temperatures affecting electrical equipment. And then for the economy, we noted unsafe and uncomfortable conditions in private homes, increased business disruption, reduced safety for agricultural workers and damage to crop, as well as increased failure of refrigeration trucks, which can affect food supply chains and impacts to local tourism, as well as increased food costs. So this is just a small subset, the most significant findings from a much larger set of impacts we identified as part of this analysis. And so the outcomes from our work have led to a couple of different deliverables. So the key outcome is our detailed project report, which serves as that toolkit that I mentioned. It outlines the findings from our analysis as well as a set of recommended actions that could be taken at a range of scales, whether it's led by the RDOS, whether it's led by individual partners, or whether it's to be led in collaboration across the region or with other provincial bodies. We also are working on and finalizing a public-facing summary report that highlights the key outcomes and can be a little bit more digestible for the broader public. And then backing all of this up is a set of 5 technical memoranda that summarize the outcomes from the key analysis dimensions of our work. The one that's not shown here is a separate memoranda on our parks assessment. And so out of this analysis, as I mentioned, this is the toolkit, essentially. So we identified 9 specific strategies that are recommended across 4 different strategy areas. The first area of focus is enhancing the region's emergency response and preparedness. And this includes providing more educational materials for members of the public so they can build their own household resilience. It also includes finding ways to enhance outreach and support to individuals and private businesses and properties. And then, of course, finding ways to strengthen emergency response so that it's better prepared to respond to these unique types of hazard events. In terms of enhancing green space, this dimension was both about protecting biodiversity and also leveraging the value that green space can provide for cooling areas. And so we identified one strategy to support thriving natural systems, so really protect that biodiversity. The second is to leverage natural assets that support cooler neighborhoods. And the third is to expand and enhance cooling infrastructure in parks, which can provide a really important respite for folks to retreat to if they're out and about on a hot day. In terms of strategies for community-built systems, we identified an important need to clarify a regional coordinated response and approach for cooling centers and expand and enhance the cooling centers that are available, as well as to plan for strategic community infrastructure and building upgrades to make sure that those critical buildings have the cooling capacity and the backup power needed to keep occupants safe during a heat wave. And then finally, we identified a set of measures that the region and individual municipalities and nations can implement to further support your residents and your businesses in keeping their own homes cooler and designing cooler buildings and homes in the first place. So I'm sure I've gone over my 15-minute limit, so I'm not going to go in detail into the individual sub-measures which really make up the toolkit. I'll go through at a high level, but I do just want to emphasize that the model we took in developing this toolkit really wanted to honor the unique dimensions at the regional scale. So as I mentioned before, we've identified some measures, which you'll see in yellow in the toolkit, as being things we think the RDOS could lead to support the broader region. Others in blue are initiatives, we hope municipalities and nations will consider integrating as part of your own initiatives at your local scale. And then we identified a number of measures that we would see really benefiting from regional collaboration. So this is a sort of an example of the more detailed measures we've identified for the emergency preparedness and response theme of action. And you can see the same 3 strategies that I gave an overview of in the earlier slide, but just some of the more specific measures to highlight. And again, you can see yellow is for RDOS, green is for collaboration, and blue is for individual governments. Some of the specific strategies include potentially developing an extreme heat education toolkit that can be deployed at different events. Maybe it can be checked out by any municipality that has an event coming up. Looking into what a regional Hey Neighbor program could look like, which really encourages and empowers residents to check in on their neighbors and provide that outreach that that regional health services may not be able to provide. And also leaning on the networks and the expertise that your community organizations already have. So building their capacity to serve their populations during these extreme heat events. And then the third strategy, just finding ways to integrate extreme heat into your existing regional emergency program initiatives. And thinking about what first responder response and how you can protect those folks so that they can do their work in a safe way during these events. In terms of enhancing green space, thinking about ways that the region could develop some guidelines for increasing tree canopy and more drought and heat tolerant plantings, as well as identifying opportunities to really strengthen the shade and cooling infrastructure within parks. And so part of this work included providing a list of different solar canopy design options that local governments could, pick and choose from and see what might work best in your local jurisdiction. In terms of community-built systems, something that we thought was really important is that the region coordinate to identify how you'll be providing cooling services to folks visiting the region, recognizing that you're a tourism region. There was, I think, important concern noted by project partners that, they service small communities and it's not necessarily possible for all of the, the visitors and tourists from all of the holiday parks to be able to fit into the community cooling spaces that they set up, sometimes on an emergency and ad hoc basis. So thinking about what could a former and centralized cooling center strategy be for the region, and then for each local jurisdiction to think about, and then what kind of cooling center capacity can you provide to your local community members. And then in terms of infrastructure and building upgrades, working with Fortis BC to understand how they're protecting the regional grid so that it is resilient and will not fail during an extreme heat event, as well as collaborating across the region to develop a set of design guidelines for more climate resilient and high performing buildings. And something that we developed as part of this work was a cooling center suitability checklist. And so this is something we had hoped to be able to visit at least one cooling center for each project partner. That wasn't possible just in the timeline of the project. So instead what we did was we gave a checklist so that your building managers can lead those assessments themselves and identify which buildings might be best suited to serve as a cooling center and what upgrades might need to be incorporated as part of future renewal initiatives to make it better suited. And then finally, a list of measures to enhance cooling within privately owned buildings. This includes leveraging different policy initiatives to encourage the right to cool, and then just building awareness across contractors, renovators, and designers. And then at the end of the toolkit, we've identified 3 key strategies we think can help make implementation of many of these measures more efficient and cost effective. So finding ways to lean on strategic partnerships to share the load across the region, leveraging creative financing such as grant opportunities, and building awareness and buy-in across the community to empower community members to enhance their own resilience in their own household so that they don't have to rely as much on regional services. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. A question from Director Coyne.
One of the things you brought up was brownouts and that. Did you guys have any conversations with Fortis on resilience in their system? Like we have those, like we're the end of the line, right? So we always have these issues.
So we did not engage with Fortis as part of this project, but we have identified that as a recommendation for a next step for the regional district to continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, so on having a more resilient grid, it's not only working with Fortis, but also working with BC Hydro. So we're in Summerland, we're at the end of the Fortis grid. Peachland is at the end of the BC Hydro grid. Well, actually, all the way to North Bench, it goes is BC Hydro, and BC Hydro ends within Summerland's municipal boundaries. So Peachland, we're working with Peachland right now to close that loop, and that if we're able to do that, that'd benefit the whole region in terms of resiliency by connecting BC Hydro to Fortis. The challenge isn't with Fortis, it's with BC Hydro. And we've been lobbying ministers the last couple of UBCMs. But it's, I think they're finally now starting to talk to us. But it's not just for Fortis, it's also BC Hydro, that's my point.
They appreciated. And I will call for a motion to adjourn. First, second, thank you. All in favor? Good. Thanks. To the chair, please.
Thank you, Director Monteith. We'll move straight into the Regional Hospital District. I'll turn it over to Director Johansson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll call this meeting of the Okanagan-Similkameen Regional Hospital District to order at 1 p.m. and look for a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. Moved. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. I got some minutes to adopt. The minutes that the November 7th, 2024 minutes of the Okanagan-Similkameen Regional Hospital District Board be adopted. Moved. Second. Any further discussion on those minutes? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We're going to go into a bit of a closed session now. Recommendation that in accordance with Section 92B of the Community Charter, the board close the meeting to the public on the basis of the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and the provincial government or federal government, or both, or between provincial government or the federal government, or both and a third party. Can I get a mover of that? Moved. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, I'll give Adam a few minutes to get us set up.
Adopt the agenda. Moved, seconded. Any discussion? No. Right, I'll declare that one. You can declare that one.
Now you have 5 minutes.
CAO. We have staff here to talk to us about universal metering program. Can you do the introductions?
Correct. Thank you, Chair. This representation is to provide a recommendation for details related to the universal metering program, update tiered billing and schedule for installation across all RDOS water systems. Administrative recommendation is that the staff proceed with the universal metering plan and tiered billing implementation across all RDOS-owned water systems, and that the RDOS board provide a letter to support to accept an invitation to participate in a universal metering pilot project commencing in early 2025. Staff's here with a presentation and answer questions.
afternoon. Just a really quick, this is more, serves more as a bit of an update on what we've done since the last time we presented to the board in regards to the universal metering program and the steps that we're taking for the implementation plan. We can control it from here, can we? Here we go. So just a review of the reason behind the metering. I think it's fairly clear to everyone that the demand for water is constantly increasing in the region, and that with longer growing seasons, hotter summers, milder winters, and the lower precipitation that we've received in the last few years over the winter is not replenishing our supplies. So it's that much more important for us to look at our systems and make sure that we're functioning efficiently. Metering is proven to reduce outdoor residential use by 30 to 45%. And with the increase in population density in the region, we need to focus a little more carefully on how we're using that water and how it's being delivered to the public. So our current process with water restrictions and how we manage water is that we set our water restrictions within our water systems to help manage limitations that we have within supply, but we're restricted with that because we don't have a means of recognizing how much of an impact our water restrictions are having. So metering helps to give us that quantifiable value that tells us how successful our water restriction application is. So within the RDOS, we're currently managing 10 water systems, and just one of them is fully metered at the moment. We have a variety of water sources. Treatment requirements, user types, and the number of connections vary from community to community. We do have somewhere around 3,200 water system users that are not metered currently that we're looking to bring online. Not all at once, but end game. So currently our meters that we're using are provided by Neptune Technologies. We have those in West Bench, and we've found that they have been very reliable. They're familiar for staff and operators, and they do offer us varying levels of technology that we can use and functions that will benefit operators, staff, and residents. So with moving forward with the universal metering, what we're hoping to do is implement an AMI infrastructure. So that's an advanced metering infrastructure. And the difference between what we're using now and what we're proposing is it gives us a little bit more functionality and interaction with users, so residents can actually activate an account and look at, like, as you can see on the laptop there, it shows their consumption patterns on a regular 15-minute interval. So they've got near live data that they can access and manage their water consumption in almost real time versus the monthly readings that we do now. We have had a propagation study performed by staff at Neptune. So what that is they are reviewing topography, location, potential spots for these collector boxes to be located in the communities. That gives us the most reliable collection for information consistently throughout the community. One of the features of our current and moving forward is the leak detection program. So that's a really critical component for our water meters and our water systems as a whole. We need to be able to recognize what parts of the system are leaking and where we're wasting water and sort of cut back on those uses, because there's no point in treating water if it's escaping through leaks. So we're not able to, I can't remember what the term they use is, no cost losses or no bill losses maybe. So it's water that's leaking out of the system that we're paying to treat and manage and distribute, but it's not making it through to a consumer, so they're not paying for the water, it's just being lost in the system. It also helps us to isolate mainline portions of our system. So within a community, we have to correct our portion as much as residents need to be responsible for making sure that their systems aren't leaking as well. As far as scheduling is concerned, this is what we had for a proposed budget for the next 5 years. We are working through how to implement as quickly as we can, but still make it affordable and sensible for each community. Okay, so activating or within the implementation process, the next step is activating the upgraded reading methods so that the whole system is metered. And we can't actually do that until we have every connection within the system attached to a meter. So to look at that AMI reading where we're getting the 15-minute increments, we can't have part of a community active within that and the rest of the community on the old system. It's all got to be done at once. And a shorter installation period is obviously preferred because of that scenario. And then we do need to finalize a few of the locations. We just needed to do a little bit more work with Neptune on finalizing the perfect or the optimal locations for those data collection receivers so that each system is integrating into our mapping properly. Next steps is going through the cost analysis for each water system to make sure that we set the correct tiered rates and structures so that it's practical for both operational costs and cost effective for residents. We'll be working with finance staff to make sure that we have our structures updated and that the meter data can be integrated into our systems and our billing structures as well. And then the final piece is creating those communication plans that'll include regional connections, project page, publications, and then a community-specific action plan for each water system. And I think that is the end of our very quick presentation.
Okay, thank you to staff. Floor is open for questions. Okay, Director Holmes.
So just our experience in Summerland is that when somebody's metered, they do find a heck of a lot of leaks on their place. And so there's the potential for sticker price shock. So what we did is have a year of mock billing so they could see what they would be paying if they were actually, so I'm just wondering if something like that is being considered.
Ms. Fierro.
Yes, that is included in our strategy. I'm not sure how long we haven't worked out, depending on what the cost structure looks like when we do the analysis. But there will likely be a period where we do a mock billing just to make sure that residents recognize what the difference is going to be and how they can adjust their consumption before they have to start paying.
Next, I have Director Wiebe, then Knodel.
Yes, and thank you. I guess two questions. The first one is the recommendation is two pieces, one about the metering plan and a tiered billing. And I'm wondering if those can be separated. I don't know if that's
Staff?
Maybe.
Staff, can we separate these two?
Yes.
Okay. Because I'd like to speak to, if we can do that, I'd like to propose that because I'd like to speak to the tiered system. I know Hydro does that as well. I would suggest that it disproportionately affects people who can least afford it. If you have means, then doubling it doesn't really mean much, but it does for those who, low-income families and different folks who might have more use of the water. We don't pay more at the pump for gasoline. The punishment in and of itself is that if you need more fuel, you pay more. But it's the same price, whether you buy 500 liters or 100 liters. And I'm not in favor of the tiered system. I know I may be the only one at the table that feels that way. So that's why I wanted asked for it to be separated. Because I think I don't know anybody that just intentionally tries to have water running because the bill's not high enough. It would be expensive regardless. I'm just not in favor of the tiered system. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wiebe. Any comments from staff?
I would like to just clarify that when we're setting our tiered structure, I think the intention is that we can assess it system by system, and what we're planning on doing is trying to keep it as close to what the existing rate is. It wouldn't be a double, like we're not expecting to double the rates or the cost to the consumer when we set our rate structure, as long as it's covering the expense of operating and some pre-planning. The intention is to set the tiers so that it's mimicking and very close to what they're paying currently.
All right. I've got Director Knodel, then I have Federico, Johansson, and yeah. So Director Knodel. Sorry. Okay.
And through the chair, Director Taylor brought something to my attention last night, is that there are much cheaper meters out there in the world being used now by municipalities right across Canada. I don't ever recall us being given a choice on meters, on costs or styles or systems. I'm just wondering how we came to the decision to use this particular meter. That's one particular item that I have. And then also we have more and more farm areas that are becoming part of metered systems. And that was brought up at UBCM as a very serious situation, because now we're using treated water on farmland. Of course, there's an expense to that. And there's also potential for increasing fire risk by basically getting a cost to the point where people who are on the fringe, the actual interface of the community, pulling back on their watering and creating a higher risk area. Those three questions I'll let you deal with. That's enough for me at the moment.
Thanks. Ms. Fierro or Ms.
Yeah,
Bloomfield?
I'll
Okay.
talk to at least a couple of them. Yeah, the specific meter type, when we did universal metering for West Bench, that was when we looked at the different types of meters. And we have, at the time, there was a couple of different ones, and we selected the Neptune ones in the end. So when we purchased those, we also purchased the infrastructure that goes along with them, the program, the readers, the various things that we need in order to do that. As the time has gone on, we continue to use the Neptune because we already have the infrastructure in place for it. They're very reliable. We have not had a lot of issues with Neptune, and we're very pleased with it. At this point, we do want to continue with it because of the stuff we already have in place for the Neptune meters. If we were to change to a different type, then we would need a duplicate of all of our infrastructure in terms of our readers, the programming, our annual fees that we pay for the software. So we would just be duplicating it. So that's for that part. As far as the ag properties, when the ag parcels are metered, if they are considered a farm under the farm use under the various acts, then there would be a different rate. So there would be an irrigation rate for those. Usually we would have the domestic residential, and then we would have the agriculture rates. The Fire Smart, I don't know, do you want to take that one?
So throughout the past summer, we did participate in some public meetings, some small public meetings, just to discuss the idea of water restrictions and bringing in the universal metering, and some of the discussion that we had through those meetings related to the fire smarting. I did have a few conversations with both fire staff and fire smart people, and the recommendation was that it's more important for landscaping to be maintained. So keeping grass shorter than 6 inches was acceptable or didn't pose any greater risk having it green and luscious versus having clean trimmed grass and letting it dry out. It wasn't a significant change in the risk associated with it, so it wasn't a huge component of the consideration.
Thank you. I have Director Federico, then Johansson, Bloomfield, and Monteith.
Thank you to the chair. As we move through some of these conversations, can I ask that this be referred to my Naramata Water Committee for conversation and input, please?
I have Director Johansson.
Yeah, just a couple comments. I agree for sure that water meters are going to help you identify leaks, and knowing that if you can find those leaks or tell you how much maintenance or repair work your system needs, I think that's going to be invaluable. We haven't found that they're so great at reducing water consumption, and to that end, I think a tier would probably help. We got our report last council meeting on Monday, and it was interesting that our water consumption, even though we went to stage 1, which was watering every other day, our water consumption never dropped. People are just watering twice as much every other day. So, I think a tiering is part of a strategy that would go well with water meters. Exactly how you do that, I think Penticton might be doing that, and we're kind of considering it as well. It's a tricky one because the Fortis tier, it's pretty punitive if you don't have access to a different fuel. So those would be my comments.
Any comments from staff on that?
We've done quite a lot of analysis on how the different regional districts in the valley and municipalities as well, how they've set up the structures. There are several that have tiered billing structures as well, and it's not necessarily set up so that like that first level in the tier is very generous with the allowance on how much is allowed to be used before you start paying more. And even with those additional tiers within the system, it's not a huge penalty for using that extra level of water. So like I said, we're working on trying to make sure that our tiers are set up so that people recognize what overconsumption looks like versus normal consumption. We're not expecting people to squeeze into teacup-sized water supply, honestly.
Thank you. I have Directors Bloomfield, Monteith, and Pendergraft.
Yeah, just a quick response to Director Weeb and his comments there about being punitive on excessive use, but when you're comparing with sort of electrical supply and water supply, and I know that in Europe they've had metered systems there for decades and decades. I can remember them from when I lived there. So, and the idea was that you have a base rate. A family needs a certain amount of water, and you have a base rate, and a certain amount of electricity, you have a base rate to have a comfortable home. And then if you're going to go above and beyond that, then you pay the excess rate. And it stops waste, but it allows for the fact that people can have that comfortable lifestyle in their house for their family.
Thank you. I'm not getting a question there, just a comment. Yeah. Okay, Director Monteith.
Thank you. Through the chair. I don't have a water system, so I haven't really followed the process here, but I guess I'm curious, are you going to bulk purchase all of the water meters at once and then kind of roll them out? What's the plan for that?
Go ahead. To staff.
At the moment, we've been working sort of slowly at having a supply available to us. We have talked to Neptune, and if we go kind of full steam ahead, they are prepared to hold a supply for us so that we have it available. We don't have anywhere to put 3,000 meters and pits at the moment, so they're willing to hold that stock for us. So we've sort of started that conversation, but we haven't pinned anything down quite yet. But we would do that with the benefit of bulk ordering, obviously. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Director Pendergraft.
Okay, thank you. I understand the desire to keep the same brand of meter. I'm just curious about the location, because there's ones that go at the curb and then there's ones that go on the inside of the house. Same brand is my understanding, but an extreme difference in price. So has that been considered?
Ms. Bloomfield.
Thank you. Yeah, the meter itself is the same price. whether it goes in the house or in the pit. It's the pit itself that's the extra cost. We have looked at that. We did look at that back when we were doing our water regulatory bylaw, back for several years, about 2017, 2018. I know we had a discussion on the meters, because it's actually written in our regulatory bylaw that they are pits at the curbs. And the reason that we do that is there's many different advantages by having it out at the property line. The biggest one is a lot of homeowners that have, decent sized lots will have their agriculture or irrigation coming off before the house. So we would be able to capture the house usage, but we would miss their irrigation. It's quite common. And in a lot of places, the leaks are in the irrigation systems. So we would miss the leaks, and it really wouldn't do part of what we want to set out to do, which is catch the leaks on their properties so that they can go in and fix their irrigation or fix things in their house. There are many other reasons, but I think that's one of the biggest ones.
And a follow-up to that.
Go ahead, Director.
Is my understanding from reading that is the proposal is to do all the systems in 2025, 2026, those 2 years. Is that correct? Because that's the way it read to me, and I'm thinking that's pushing it. A lot of systems in 2 years' time. So could that be made a little clearer? Because the proposal says, although the budgeting, the money isn't even there till that, but the proposal says these ones in 2025 and a couple in 2026.
So I think it's likely the budgeting that we had laid out was a discussion that was had with directors as far as what's available to contribute for metering, which is different than what our prioritization schedule would have been. And that's based on an operational perspective. So for us, it's the high priority ones we really want to get done first because they're higher consumption. There's a lot of leaks in the system for various reasons, the age of the infrastructure. So we've set our recommendations from an operational perspective that these are the ones that we want to do first, but we haven't set a schedule, and it's definitely not going to happen in 2 years.
Okay, I have Directors Holmes, Barkwell, and Coyne. Sorry. I picked up on you last, so. Yeah.
We're closer.
Just following on what Director Johansson was saying, that our experience in Summerland is, it doesn't really reduce a lot of consumption in the residential, but except for in terms of identifying leaks. And then that's huge. That's a huge amount of reduction once those leaks are fixed. But where consumption has been greatly reduced is the metering of agricultural properties. And there's been a complete shift over to drip irrigation and everything like that, a huge reduction in water use in that, and that's where most water is used, especially in the hot summer months. And so I do have a question. So, so the question is, what is the long-range plan for metering agriculture properties, or is there one?
To staff?
Yes. So within the water systems that we currently own or manage, there's not very many agricultural properties that are technically classified as farmland or in the ALR. So we have a very minimal impact as far as farm properties are concerned. We also don't want to interfere with food security in the region. So that's something that we're not, although we will have it set up like the tiered system is meant to address the different categories of use, so residential versus commercial versus agricultural. So it'll be set up in a way that captures each of those different uses independently. But we don't want to, we're not looking to impact residential use from an indoor perspective. What we're looking at is outdoor use and how appropriate landscaping, like all of our programming is kind of all tied together. So the water restrictions are looking at the outdoor water use, and that's what we're looking at trying to reduce and create efficiencies in. We're not looking to mandate how people use water within their homes. That's not part of this process. And we want to be able to verify that when we're setting water restrictions, that there's some sort of positive impact on that outdoor water use. So whether that's an adjustment to landscaping to make sure that we're using appropriate landscaping, we're watering at the right time of day, like all of that make water work stuff applies definitely and kind of ties into our universal metering plan as well.
Supplemental?
So then I understand, so most farms would have their own wells and whatnot. So if that's the case, then how do we encourage agricultural properties to, conserve water and, move to, I don't really buy the whole food security thing. You can change, you can water efficiently on agricultural property and still grow whatever you want. How do we then address those agricultural properties where there's a lot of water wastage, which then affects everybody?
Staff?
Because we don't have them connected to our water systems, we don't have jurisdiction over, we can make recommendations and we can provide education, but we don't, like, that's a Ministry of Ag provincial jurisdiction, as opposed to anybody, like, really within the RDOS, we can put means in place for properties that are attached to our water systems, but that's as far as we can go. So we can provide the education, we can talk about it, we can do outreach, we can do all of those things, but we can't force anybody that's not connected. I mean, we can't really force people that are connected, but we're hoping that people will cooperate.
I'll just ask a quick clarification then. From what I'm gathering, we don't actually service many farm-type properties.
There's a few, I think there's a few properties in OK Falls that are agricultural. Sun Valley has agriculture and a few in Naramata.
Thank you. Director Barqua.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to add to what Director Holmes said. Our water consumption as a whole for the community has seen a general decline for the last 15 years, even though population has grown. And then when we introduced meters, it didn't really make that much difference. But it's hard to say because each year depends a little bit on the amount of sunshine and rain. But I'm glad to see you're going to do the monitoring by a minute, because it really does catch the leaks. Like I had a leak in an outdoor all-season tap that I never would have known if I hadn't been given a notice of saying you're having a flow, although minor, throughout the night. We also found, though, that we had to introduce a bylaw that gave forgiveness for somebody who maybe had a flood, and suddenly they got a $400 water bill because they went, they weren't. So on top of all the other issues that come with a flood, they've got this big bill. So we had to be in the bylaws, and the board will have to approve it, that you can have a mechanism for some forgiveness in those sort of situations. We looked at pits and said, and staff recommended pits, and our council turned it down. Said that's adding a huge cost to the homeowner to require pits in new construction. It's inconvenient for replacing, but supposedly these new meters last much longer, because we had huge problems, and meters have been a big expense in our water system. So I'm wondering what you have calculated a cost per meter for installation.
Currently, we are estimating somewhere between 3,500 to 5,000 per. It's really difficult to sort of provide an exact number, because it's going to be based on whatever the excavation looks like. So if it's through rock, it's obviously going to be a little bit more difficult to facilitate than it would through soil. But that's the estimation currently. But the way that we have it set up is we're funding it through the budgeting process, or we're looking at grants and pilot projects to assist with that funding. It's not something that will be billed directly to the homeowner when we come down the street with the excavator.
So it'll have to be recovered somewhere through the charges, water rates, and if you don't get a grant. Or
yes.
Director Coyne.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to hear you want to use Neptune. They're a great company with a great product. And um, I understand the concern around the room about the pit. It is expensive, but have you guys thought about like a hybrid where you have like more urban areas where they're, you know, you can have it in-house versus the pit? I totally get where it's like you got big yards or whatever, because we found, you know, we go shut off a service and then it's still leaking. And it's like, where is that? Oh, well, they tied into the line from the sidewalk because it's their property and we can't do anything about it, and it's still leaking away. So, and a bunch of these sort of semi-illegal hookups around the area. So, just have you guys thought about that for like, say, OK Falls, where you have apartments and all these other things? Like, how are you going to deal with all that if you go to just one standard, you know, one? And then and you're sure Neptune can supply, because we had to put ours on hold because they couldn't.
To staff.
So we're focusing mainly on the pit meters because of those kinds of scenarios. We've found that I think meters within a home are super relevant for urban populations, but because our water systems are all quite, not necessarily remote, but they're smaller communities, there's not that intense. They're small communities with large properties, so there's not that kind of intense density that we would see in urban centers, obviously. So it's a lot easier for us to put it at the curb stop, so that if they have irrigation running, and most people prefer to have it laid out that way, that's captured within our readings, so that when we're talking through a scenario. So if we have a mainline leak on our system and we've detected a mainline leak on our system and the meters are in the house, we can't differentiate between it being a leak on our main water main somewhere, or if it's someone's irrigation leaking. So we have to have that separation so that we can identify the issues on our side of the system versus residential use.
And I'll just add to that a little. The currently commercial and multi-family units, we do allow inside ones. So, because we just find that a lot of the commercial ones will have a utility room. And then it makes sense to put a 2-inch meter there, because we don't really want to be putting a 2-inch meter pit, which exponentially increases in cost. So those we do put into the buildings themselves.
So I've got a couple of comments. I'm late to this. It sounds like the decision was made in part 5 years ago in 2017 to look at pit meters. I do know we're getting hit. I was at an open house just recently about garbage, and you know, people are not happy with a doubling of garbage fees, and that's, you know, that's just, what is it, $150 to $350 per year. And here we're talking about a $3,500 to possibly $5,000 expenditure. With many people in my community have moved from Calgary or Vancouver, and they have in-house meters. And so I'm just wondering, you know, is this something we can revisit? Two other things. I'm strongly in favor of meters, okay? I really am. And I'm reluctant to kick this down the road, but I sense that's partially what I'm arguing for. I see value in the pilot project and getting that started, but to me, the other motion is a step too far for me for today. Anyway, Director Coyne?
Yeah, I just wondered if I could make a suggestion. I don't want to make the motion because I think it should be the users that are the one making that. Whether everybody who's going to be involved in this get together and have a chinwag on this, because this doesn't impact all of us. And I think those of you who are going to be directly impacted by this need to sit down and, especially with staff, and figure these particulars out, because you're, like you said, you've already taken it on the chin for the garbage, and now we're talking thousands of dollars and whatnot. So That would be my suggestion. I know it's pushing it off a little bit, but it doesn't have to push it off that far, and then we can bring it back. And
Okay, Director Johansson and then Director Holmes.
Just one quick question, just around future grants. Is there anything tied to having water meters in? I know that, I mean, we put water meters in years ago, and I think SUES is dealing with that now, and grants are sort of tied to having water meters in there, and there's actually a benefit that may come to fruition down the road.
Ms. Bloomfield?
Yes, a lot of the senior government grant funding grants actually require water meters. So that they want to know your water conservation plans, how you've rolled it all out, what kind of reduction you've seen. And yeah, they definitely want to see that.
Director Holmes?
I get why you need to have a pit meter to capture anybody who might have irrigation coming off before it gets to the home. That makes sense. But if you don't, then is it possible to be able to give the homeowner the choice and to have an in-home one? Or, you know, and then you have a bit of a mixed bag, but can you work with that, or is that a possibility?
Ms. Bloomfield or Ms. Fierro?
I think we found in this region, there's been a little bit of a struggle as far as completing the readings in meters that are inside properties as well. So we've sort of tried to mitigate that by just making sure that we have the meters out front for ease of reading. And that will actually affect the propagation study. It was based on outdoor meters, on pit meters. So we'd have to go back and assess how well cell service and connectivity works with the meters to the collector boxes based on them being inside a property or inside a structure versus being inside the pits.
Director Coyne?
if you're using a minute-by-minute metering, you'll be able to tell if somebody's stealing water, because you'll see that their rate is way higher than it should be. So, you know, if that's part of the concern on that, you can still figure that out with that software that Neptune has.
Well, we've got motions being suggested by staff. The first is that staff proceed with the universal metering plan and tiered billing implementation across all RDOS-owned water systems. And the second one, which we're told can be split off, is that the RDOS board provide a letter of support to accept an invitation to participate in a universal metering pilot project. Anybody want to make a motion? Sorry, Director Weep.
I think if I can clarify, I was hoping to separate the universal metering
Yep.
plan, which I'm in favor of, from the tiered billing, so that first one be split. The second one I think has support, but that first motion be split. And if not, I mean, I can just vote no and recommend and make a comment as to why I would vote that down. But I'm totally in favor of meters. I don't support the tiered system. And I recognize I might be in the minority, but I'd like that to be noted. So however we do that.
Director Federico?
Yes, thank you. Debating if I want a motion to defer the first one, because I would like it to go to my committee first for some conversation, at least for my area. But I'll move the second part of that on a letter of support.
Okay, so we have the second motion moved. Is there a seconder? Director Knodel? Okay, any further discussion on this? So the RDOS board would provide a letter of support to accept an invitation to participate in a universal metering pilot project commencing in early 2025. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. Is there a second motion?
Yeah, I'll move to defer that then until at least it goes to my water committee.
Okay. Motion to defer. Is there a seconder? Director Coyne. Does that need to be voted on? Yeah. Okay. All those in favor? Sorry. All right, we'll take some discussion. Director Gilbert?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. And this is, I guess, a question for staff or maybe the CAO is, I feel like this comes up a lot of the time where these projects come forward and then it's deferred to these local committees. And I was wondering if there's like a policy that can be put in, or is there a policy that's not being followed? Like, for example, in Penticton, we have the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. We get it, it gets deferred to the committee. They have an opinion and it comes back to us with a recommendation. I feel like there needs to be something in here instead of it coming to us and then now being deferred and then, coming back again. So is there a way to have this go through these committees before it comes to the board?
I don't know the answer to that. CAO?
Definitely, we can do that, where we can set up a policy. If there is a committee or a subcommittee, we can move it over. Sometimes it's timely, though. We would put a time limit on that just because we don't want to slow it down.
And we have a distinction here as to what committee we're talking about. I think Director Fedrigo is talking about her water committee and the community, whereas some others are thinking that we are the committee itself, the board and the electoral areas. In any event, Director Monteith.
Through the chair, sorry, through the chair, remind the board, everything used to go to the commission and then come to the board. We switched this way for efficiency of reason, now we're going back the other way. For most things I try to approve at the board level, and send to the commission. I know it's contentious, now we're asking for back the other way.
Yeah.
Explain that we changed for a reason, and now
Okay, to our CAO.
So the director's correct. One reason why you would do it this way, it's the efficiency. There's times when there's a lot of work put into this, and that you have the right to ask any questions. And if you do have concerns, then you can take it to whatever committee you wish. But while, yes, we can change the process to go back, it does reduce our efficiency.
Director Fedrigo?
I was going to say then on that motion that it comes back, I would say February, give like early February, because I should give enough time to try and get my committee together. Also, in fairness, with Director Roberts not being here and one of his systems being involved, he may want some time to digest this as well.
Okay, there
Director Gettins.
There are alternates, but yes, okay. Director Monteith?
Check.
Thank you. I guess I'm just curious about budget. So if the project is on the table now, does it proceed through budget?
I think she's suggesting that it would come back in February.
Yeah, but it might be we're already in second reading at that point.
CAO?
It would stay in the budget with a contingency.
Director Fedrigo?
My understanding is it also impacts fees and charges, which doesn't come to the board till about March. So it gives a bit of time for impact there.
Okay. All right, Director Coyne?
Yeah, but if the committee can meet sooner than that, can it not return sooner than that?
I think that's probably the case, yeah. CAO?
Also, there's no guarantee that you take it to the committee that they're going to make a decision at that point. So you'd have to give them a specific timeline. And if they don't meet that timeline, the board needs to accept that whatever you receive from staff should be accepted.
Director Gilbert?
Thank you, Drew. I know. Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to be voting against this. If the timeline was by next meeting, the commission would have a decision, I'm all for it. That's the timeline that we have at the city of Penticton, is between our meetings. Once it's directed to one of our committees, we have that recommendation from that committee the next meeting, and that's how you create efficiencies. So I'm not going to accept all the way to February. I'd want this next meeting.
You, Director Holmes.
Just a question of clarification. Are we not supposed to debate deferrals?
So what I have is that staff proceed with universal metering plan and tiered billing implementation across all RDOS water systems. The motion today is that it be postponed to enable time to refer to the water committees, and return to the board prior to February 2025.
All those in favor?
What do we got here?
Which way did we just?
Let's just go with opposed. Yep, and just,
Opposed are Conan, Weed, I believe, Director Weed. Were you opposed?
No, I'm not opposed to postponing.
Okay,
Mine
all right,
was
good.
the chair
That's-
thing, so.
Stop, I was just trying to check your count. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude. I was just trying to get the count for staff. Other hands up were Director Gilbert. Anyone else? I got Conan's, I got
Carries.
Weed,
It
I
carries.
got. Oh, sorry. And I got Gilbert. So motion carries. Okay, so that first one is deferred. Is there any other motions that people want to make? No? Yeah? All right, you're making that, seconded? All right, all those in favor? Thank you. That's carried.
Thanks, Director Taylor, and thanks everybody for your patience today. And we'll see you next meeting.
Additional water billing, 30, say it's $4,800